We have Michael Spitzer here over the Chromatic, toasting in, and Michael is the very healthy gentleman there with the water, and I'm the guy with the whiskey. What are you going to do? Oh, I have to do this. This is another thing I have to do. Sorry, I have to, product placement. There we go. All right. So, Michael, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We've done a few shows in the past, and we've talked about a lot of things, and I want to talk about a lot of things again this evening. But what I'm really interested in to kick things off is there's a few things that I never got to when we first started to converse and have what I consider a fantastic relationship, though we've never met in person. But you've been extremely helpful to me over the years. And one of the things I think we've never really sat down and talked about was your early years, and I want to kick it off from the musical standpoint, if you will. When did you pick up the guitar?
Well, probably the first time I picked one up was probably about 12 years old, but I admit I didn't stick with it.
Okay.
I always say in life, there's people that seem to have one thing they get interested in and they become obsessed with it. And often those kind of people are the ones who excel at it. Your Van Halens, your Yngwie Malmsteens, who everything's focused. And the moment they find it, they just dive into it. I was probably the polar opposite. I was the one that was interested in everything: scuba diving, motorcycle racing, weightlifting, metal detecting for Civil War relics. So I got interested in guitar, went to a pawn shop, bought one. Nobody in my family had a musical background, and I was living in Virginia. I was born in Virginia, in Shenandoah Valley, and of course, we didn't have a lot of music schools or whatever. So I tried to self-teach, not really knowing what I was doing. Got frustrated, went back to scuba diving and 10-speed bike touring and the other activities I was doing.
So growing up there in Shenandoah Valley, which is an absolutely gorgeous area of the country, so were you always athletic, even as a young kid?
Yeah, I think probably I lean more towards outdoor activities than indoor.
Okay.
I wasn't never big in video games, even that early era video games. Like I said, early on, I did play some sports, but I was the kind of guy I always liked to be out. I'm the classic case that you always hear about walking 6 miles to school each way and all that. But in my case, it was true. And through the woods, and my friends and I always played, corner lot football games, which is interesting. I never see that anymore. I never see kids do that anymore, where you would just have a corner where it's a pickup game of football, and every time strangers coming by from other neighborhoods on their bikes would see it. Hey, can we join in? Next thing you knew, you had this ridiculous game with 36 people in the field. But
it was neighborhood kind of stuff. It was great.
Full tackle, no equipment. People got arms.
We used to do snow football. So it was same idea that you're talking about, these pickup games, and it would be dead of January, freezing cold, which even made the tackling better because you were still going to get hurt, but at least there was something on the ground, and come home, the clothes would be, and no padding, no nothing, just full tackle, and we'd just be ripped to shreds, bruised up, but like ice and snow everywhere, up here in the Philadelphia area. But I love those days. That was after school, weekends, and we also had a big kickball thing here. I don't know, but it was like kickball combined with dodgeball. It was brutal. Everything was brutal, in hindsight, but we didn't think of it that way. Yeah. So that's awesome. And so you would just
and like I said, I also like 10-speed bikes. I was big into bike touring. My parents had divorced. My father and a friend of his went cross country 10-speed bike touring right after getting divorced from my mother, and that got me interested in it also. So my grandfather owned a bike shop. And one year for my birthday, he says, "What do you want?" And I said, "How about we custom build me a bicycle?" So we went into the bike shop and he let me pick everything. It's like, well, I want those Shimano gears. I want that frame. I want those, those rims. And we put together a 10-speed tour bike. And I would go on like 50 and 100-mile bike trips, usually from the house that I lived at the time to visit my grandparents in like a big loop. Mm-hmm. So like I said, I find myself always more interested in physical activities. I got certified as a scuba diver when I was like 14 years old. Full PADI certification, which at the time was unusual.
Well, I was going to ask you that. Like, first of all, two questions in that, especially where you were growing up in Shenandoah Valley.
Yeah.
What was your draw to scuba diving, and at what? Obviously, you have to be certified before you even do it. It's not just like an activity that, hey, I bought some gear. I'm going to go jump in some water and see if it works. Like you have to train for it, right?
Sure.
So
yeah, and I should probably I probably mixed two locations there because I got interested in scuba diving as a kid in Florida. I mean, in Virginia.
Oh, okay.
But gotcha. I could, all I could do is play with snorkel equipment in the local river or whatever. But soon after my mother remarried, we moved to Florida.
Oh, and, okay.
And I was really just buying skin diver magazines, watching Jacques Cousteau on TV. And finally, I think for my birthday, they said, "Hey, well, do you want scuba diving lessons?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you got to take it serious because you're going to be the youngest one in there." Nowadays, it's not a big deal. Younger people can get certified relatively easy now. But back in the 70s, it was unusual to go through the full certification because the training was harder. There's a lot of stuff you had to do for scuba diving back in the 70s that if you go now to get certified today, you don't have to do. For example, we had to do free ascents from like 60 feet in the ocean, ditch your gear and just come up to the surface with no gear. They don't do stuff like that anymore.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. Wait a minute. So you're in the ocean 60 feet.
Yeah.
And then what do you do? You just
you ditch your gear. You take all your gear off and then exhale continuously to free ascent to the surface. The idea is to train you to be prepared if you had total equipment failure at depth.
Jesus Christ, 60 feet.
How you safely come to the surface without rupturing your lungs. So you learn to totally exhale. And it's an interesting phenomenon for people who know about scuba diving because obviously as you dive, the air compresses in your lungs. So the instructor tells you just start exhaling. Do not hold your breath. That's how people rupture their lungs because as you rise from the depth, you say you breathe out your regulator at 60 feet. That air is in your lung. If you hold your breath, as you are rising, it's expanding. Well, if you don't exhale, you could actually rupture a lung, or at lesser case, get bends or whatever. So, but he says, don't worry, you will not run out of air, but do not ascend faster than 1 foot per second. So basically at 60 feet, it takes you about a minute to come to the surface safely.
So that's exhaling for a full minute.
Well, that's what's weird because as you rise to the surface, as you're exhaling, the remaining air keeps expanding. So it's almost like it's a strange sensation if you do it. It's like you just keep exhaling for a minute,
and you're like, "Where's this extra air coming from?"
Yeah, and they don't do that anymore. I mean, we also had called Hell Night. That was near the end of your scuba dive training, where they put you in the pool, and the instructor would say, "Go underwater, and you will continue to stay underwater, swimming back and forth, and do not come to the surface, no matter what happens." No matter what happens. So you're starting to swim and all of a sudden your mask gets ripped off and thrown to the other end of the pool. So you have to swim, get the mask going and clear the water out from underneath by exhaling air into it and that displaces the water. But while you're doing that, he reaches back and turns your tank off. So now you're reaching back and turning your tank off. And while you're doing that, he grabs your fins and throws in at the other end. And they just keep compounding problems on you to see if you will panic or if you can solve all your problems underwater, or you jump to the surface. And then, of course, the worst one they used to do, and here again, they do not do this anymore. I've talked to some younger scuba divers, and they think this is crazy and absurd because they say, "When will this ever happen in real life?" But he unscrews your regulator from your tank and takes it away. He has to be the regulator, the hose, he takes it away. So you had one of the things they taught you back then, I guess, which was back then the PADI scuba diving certification. They would incorporate some of the Navy SEAL training back then. because you got to remember, me getting certified in the 70s is when the movie with Jacqueline Bisset, The Deep,
Oh, the
and
Deep.
Nick
I saw
Nolte
that in
came
the
out,
theaters.
and the
Yeah.
Jaws. Yeah, I mean,
With the
scuba
big
diving
moray
really.
eel. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And scuba diving was not super mainstream back then. It was just coming into its own as a broad sport. It was kind of a very niche sport at first, not nearly as widespread as today. All we had to do, he takes the regulator away. You've got to cradle your tank, take your tank off your back, cradle it between your legs, cup the valve, and open the valve, crack the high pressure valve on the tank, breathing the air off the thing. They don't do that anymore. That kind of stuff, then you had to do a 3 hour. It was a 3 hour. No, 1 hour continuous swimming, and then a 3 hour survival float.
What's
where you
a
had to
survival
basically
float?
float in case you were out at sea, you were stranded for some reason or whatever. And here, that also was a carryover from the Navy SEAL training. A lot of that stuff, like I said, today is kind of considered extreme, and I don't think even the advanced open water or dive master certifications today make you do some of that crazy stuff. But here again, it was the earlier days of certifying people to dive. They wanted to make sure people were totally safe, and so they had the standard PADI diving certification, blending in some of the Navy SEAL safety and survival stuff. And I was told, and I do not know this is true, that at that age, back in the 70s, I was one of the younger people to get certified at that time.
A 14-year-old kid going through that?
Yeah, but hey, for me, it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed it because at that point in life, I was living in a swimming pool anyway. So I enjoyed it. I got my certification card, and but like I said, today's certification has been very streamlined. It's much more practical, probably, because 90% of that stuff probably would never arise in real life in a recreational diving situation.
Okay, and I can see that. However, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. From what you just described to me, from all of just that training alone, I find it's. I would think that would be superior training, right? I mean, if you think about it. I mean,
Well,
okay,
like I
you're
said, I
right.
mean,
90% of the
personally think
time that
so.
wouldn't happen. Maybe it wouldn't happen. But what if it did? What about that 10%? Like, so do you think that did that have any influence on you, that training? Did that have any influence on you as you were going on from that 14, 15, 16, getting into your late teens, early adulthood? Did that have a huge impact on you with what you did with your life, your career, all that
I
stuff?
don't
Like,
know. I don't know if that diving certification really, because in my mind there was nothing unusual about it. I just figured, well, that's what's required if you want to be a certified scuba diver. I didn't know any better, so you really couldn't say this is extreme. It's only years later, and it's funny. A lot of people who scuba dive over the years, they like to get upgraded levels. That's you start off with one card and you say, now I'm advanced, and now I'm an open water, and now I'm a dive master. Yeah, I've been scuba diving since 1977. I never upgraded my card. Now, what's funny about that, I still have my original certification card, though I have thousands of dives over the years in oceans all over the world. But I never upgraded. Now, what's funny is when you go diving on a cruise ship on some of the islands, you have to show your certification. And I've run into this circumstance once or twice where, of course, now at my age, I'm 60 now, and being certified that long, I'll go into a dive shop and I'll show the card. And some of the younger people working in the dive shop will say, "Sir, I'm sorry, we can't let you go out on the boat. This is not valid certification." And I said, I assure you it is. It's just an old one. It's one of the early ones, but I assure you it is. And he'll go, "Hey, boss, can you look at this?" And the boss will come over and go, "Hey, sir, you're one of them old timers. Hey, kid, carry his equipment to the boat, will you?"
I was just going to say, if that kid had any idea what you went through for that training, I mean, that's basically like Navy SEAL training, right?
It
You
wasn't
know,
that hard, but I mean, it incorporated some of the things. And probably here
I
again, that was the early days of really promoting scuba, trying to get people into it as a profitable business and marketing in a sport. And
I see.
and so, but they were probably also concerned about lawsuits and people's safety. So they went overkill. Let's be honest, they went overkill mode. And as the years have gone by, they probably said, well, we can drop the standards. We don't have to be that crazy. And I'm sure there's a business motivation too. Hey, if we make this that tough, we're probably going to chase away 30% of the perspective, especially for recreational diving. I mean, truth of the matter is, it sounds
I
interesting.
got you. I see what
Unless
you mean.
I'll be honest with you, unless you're scuba diving on a shipwreck,
Yeah.
the truth of the matter is, some of the prettiest scuba diving is really 50 to 60 feet and shallower. You know,
Okay.
I live in South Florida, and so the Caribbean's close. And yes,
Right.
shipwrecks are interesting at greater depths. But once you get to a certain depth, there's not enough sunlight to fuel coral reef growth and marine animal life. So really, when you see the pretty, colorful stuff, that's usually 60 feet and less.
Okay.
So
So I see what you're saying there. So you're saying from a recreational standpoint
yeah, and
that
most people are
that
recreational divers. They're not
right.
hardcore. Um,
Have you ever did you ever dive at Sea Saba?
no.
Okay, so Sea Saba was like I did all the music for their promotional video.
Okay.
I had to
No.
compose. Not only did I do the music, I had to compose it.
All right.
Former when I was directing at the Grand School of Music, my CEO was a scuba diver, and he would go to Sea Saba, which was I guess it's like a scuba haven, but uh, it was solely based for scuba divers. It's an island, and I wish I could tell you where it is. Might be able to
Now,
look it up
what
here.
kind of music did you do for that?
I did. I did all kinds. It was interesting. It was like so. What I ended up doing was I it was overkill on my end. So what they did was they sent me their brochure, and it wasn't a place where, as you said, recreational scuba divers would go. These were serious scuba divers.
Okay.
Uh, so it was kind of like, how would you say? I don't want to use the word elite, but it was these serious scuba divers would get this brochure like, hey, see Saba. I'm actually going to try to do this as we speak, see if I can see if it's still around. So anyway, they send me this brochure to show me this island. Yeah, dive center, um, Dutch Caribbean.
Okay.
That's it. Okay, and I would just look at the pictures, and I would just sit there in my studio and what do you. So I did a lot of different things, and there's actually a funny twist to the story. I sent them I think about 20 pieces of music, um, and I didn't want to be too obvious, so I didn't do any kind of serious, like, uh, necessarily music that would have been uh, regional,
Mm-hmm.
because they said to me, they're like, well, it's not where tourists come from all over. So I was taking a look at the pictures and stuff like that, and I did. I There was some stuff that was very ethereal because of the scenery. I did some ethereal kind of thing because they were doing these big video promotion kind of things, um, and I think I did a few jazz bossa pieces, like some Latin kind of stuff. But there was
All right.
this one piece that I did for them that was very 80s, like, you know, rock 80s kind of
Okay.
thing. And so blatant that as I was mixing it, I was laughing. Like, this is just. So they ended up using, I think they ended up using like 7 or 8 of the pieces in their
Okay.
video. And they were only
Well,
using
that
clips.
was one of the reasons I asked, because I always think of scuba scenery as being a more atmospheric music, not
Mhm.
traditional. Unless, of course, the rock
Yeah.
music you're doing is when the sharks were attacking or something.
um, It was, I think it was, well, again, remember, I was given, it was kind of this charge where I was just going to send them all this stuff and let them choose. And uh, yeah, most of it was atmospheric. And I, of course, being me, I took advantage of some of the stuff and I wrote stuff that was, harmonically complex, but it was still
So was it all guitar? Was
ethereal.
it guitar oriented, or did you use synths and stuff for it?
There was synths used,
Yeah.
but I kept it guitar centric.
Okay.
I put my thumbprint on it, because it was an interesting offer to get, and I was like, oh, this would be fun, and I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could, So there was some really nice acoustic stuff I was doing on it, and challenging myself that way as well. But one of the pieces they didn't use ended up back on my DAW, and just that '80s piece that I was just like, okay, sitting there, and it sat there for about 2 years. And I get a phone call from a producer who says, I'm putting together, it was called Luma. I think they still have it in Vegas. It's a light show. It's just a
Okay.
light show. And he had composed the music for it. And I played all the guitar on his compositions as a session player. I did all the guitar work on it.
Okay.
But he was short one piece. So he calls me and he says, hey, Chris, do you have anything laying around that I need something 80s? And I was like, give me 5 minutes. So I bounced this down and I set it off thinking that, and a half hour later he calls me and he says, I'm set. I want the piece. I'm sending you a check. We're going to use it, but nothing had to be redone. He used it
my next question. Did they use it as it was?
As it was. Like, just, he goes, that's it. That's the piece. Thank you. And he sent me a check. I was
All
like,
right.
okay. So, yeah, that the Sea Saba thing is, it's an island, Saba Island, and it's still around. I'm almost curious to see if they're still using my music. So now with the website, now you would think that they're might be using my music, but anyway, yeah, and it's a lot of, obviously, as you were saying earlier, some coral reef stuff, and you see the nurse sharks and stuff like that. I think there are some wrecks off the coast of that too. So my former CEO was telling me that was his thing. He wanted to do wreck diving. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done like a lot of wreck?
Yeah.
You can't be claustrophobic in doing that stuff,
Well, I mean, I guess it also depends on how far into the ship you want to go and how much you want to explore. But you're right. Probably whenever you go through caves, swim unders, or inside of a shipwreck, of course, you have to be smart and safe. Don't be foolish. But yeah, you probably can't be extremely claustrophobic. No.
It must be nuts. So when if you would do a wreck dive, are you allowed to touch anything? Are you allowed to bring anything to the surface?
No,
Are there strict rules on that?
The general rule of scuba diving is look but don't touch, no matter where you are. Even if like in the Caribbean with coral reefs, because they're easily killed by touch. So the usual rule of thumb is look but don't touch.
Okay. Wow. And it's something you still do today.
I don't do as much of it as I used to, and there's a funny story about that. I told you I got interested in scuba diving when I lived in Virginia.
Right.
Of course, there's no place to dive up there really, and it's just total luck. My mother got remarried. She married a guy who worked as a sales rep for Quaker State Motor Oil. He got relocated down to South Florida. That's, of course, where I took the scuba diving classes down here. And immediately I started beach diving. It's if you're not going out with a group of people in a boat, the reefs and stuff are close enough to the shoreline here in South Florida that you can basically put on the equipment, swim out about 600 yards, and then drop under. I've got a YouTube video I shot probably back in 2008 of what it looks like beach diving off of Hollywood Beach, Florida. I can send you that later. Now, I did it. And I thought, hey, this is great. Now, hey, I didn't learn until years later that if we hadn't moved to South Florida, my experience would be different. Because the fact of the matter is, the coral reefs only start growing in tropical waters, which means the smallest little coral reef formations begin around West Palm Beach, Florida. As you pass Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, and just keep getting to Miami, and you keep getting bigger and bigger as you head down into the Keys, and then of course further down into the Caribbean, Cozumel, and all that. If we had moved anywhere like Jacksonville, Florida, when I went beach diving, all I would see was sand. That's all I would have seen. So I always think there's weird coincidences in life where I was growing up in Virginia, and instead of getting interested in hunting or other things that you think traditional country boys would be interested in, I got interested in things like scuba diving. And fate would have it that my mother remarries a guy who relocates us unknowingly to the #1 best beach diving beach in the entire United States, Hollywood Beach, Florida, right where we live.
That's the universe.
You know, and not to jump topics, but there's another weird coincidence we might hit on later. When I was working my way through college in Virginia, we're just talking about coincidences real quick, but I don't want to get too much off topic, but it's a weird thing about coincidence. I got off work one night, and I was dabbling with the idea of picking up guitar again. I still hadn't done it, but now I'm in college. But I also didn't have time because I was working 36 hours a week, plus taking full-time college classes to get a chemistry degree. So I didn't have time, but I was still interested. So I would get off work at like 11 o'clock at night, stop by like a convenience store, like a 7-Eleven or whatever, and they had a guitar magazine there one day. And I said, well, they have this thing called tablature in there. What's tablature? It looks like it's showing you how to play by position. Here again, a lot of this sounds laughable to anybody now, or for you as a skilled musician. But me growing up in the Valley, nobody in my family musical, no real music schools teaching anything other than strumming, you know, a couple country music classics. And like tablature, that's neat. You wouldn't have to read music. You could just play, you know, neat. And inside there was this plastic sound page. Introducing Yngwie Malmsteen, Black Star. And so I went home and I put it on and I went, wow. Now this is great. And I made a cassette copy of it because I had a 1970 Volkswagen Beetle at the time. And my wife worked at a Subway store, and not a Subway, the chain, but a sub shop. And I had to pick her up at work. So I had already dubbed this thing over to cassette. And when I picked her up, the first thing I said was, hey, you got to hear this guy. Forget Van Halen. You got to hear this. Okay. And about 3 years later, she and I get married. We're still married, you know, today, 36 years later. But that probably, even though I had dabbled and started and stopped with guitar in the past, it wasn't until after that, and then we got married. It was probably after we aged about 26 or 27. Wow. I seriously picked up the guitar for the first time and said, okay, let me learn this note, E, F sharp. I mean, and I thought to myself, there was a voice inside my head that said, hey, most of your famous musicians like Hendrix and others had already put out their best work and died by age 27. And here you are trying to learn to fret your first note. Why are you even bothering? But there was still that interest there that, hey, even if it only becomes a hobby for myself, I'm finally going to get around to this. I've done all the other stuff, the scuba diving, the 100-mile cross-country bike touring, and the finding Civil War musket bullets and all that. And bike racing and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, all right, now I'm finally going to get around to this interest. So,
that's wild. So
the only reason I say it's a coincidence. The only reason I say it's a coincidence is years later I would move to South Florida. End up not only meeting but managing. So it's two things I was introduced to in Virginia that, oddly enough, without unknowingly hitting the best beach for scuba diving in the world without knowing any better, and then the guitar player that finally got me seriously interested in trying to learn it finally ends up himself moving from California to South Florida, about 30 minutes down the road from me, and then paths converge again.
Yes.
And the guy I was listening to right as I was graduating college is the guy's career I'm managing. So this is another one of those weird, you know.
Yeah, it's the universe. I think it's the
Yeah.
universe. It's like it's just kind of like you know. So what was it about Ingve's playing that struck you so hard? That I mean, I'm
Yeah.
seeing a parallel between the extreme. I mean, even though you said earlier that you didn't see it, the scuba training as extreme, you saw it as, oh, this is what we need to do. This is what has to happen. And but then the attraction to Ingve's guitar playing,
I think it's
I'm
probably
probably
yeah. Yeah. There's two things. Of course, the speed was one thing. I mean,
right.
that speaks for itself. But it's something else that I didn't realize till years later when I started thinking about my musical tastes. It was the
Okay.
classical influence that was in there. Because I started thinking one day about my music tastes, and you might pick up. You'll probably come figure out what I'm saying here before I get to the punchline. I never cared. I never cared much for Aerosmith, Bon Jovi. Kiss was okay when I was young, but it was always kind of like happy kind of rock, if you know what I mean.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
Van Halen. I always liked Van Halen's guitar solo work and the songs, but I was not a strong Van Halen fan because to me it was still upbeat, not knowing about Dorian modes and major keys back then. I didn't know anything about music, but I just know it's like it was too
Right.
happy in a way. And I started thinking, what was I always drawn to? Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, then Yngwie, and I realized it was the European influenced bands. That seemed to be where and I didn't recognize that at the time. I mean, Motley Crue was neat, as a lot of those early '80s bands were,
Yeah.
but I seem to always go back to Tony Iommi, Dave Murray, the guys, Iron Maiden. I seem to always get gravitated back there.
Right.
And I guess what now you'd say the minor keys, the natural minors, the harmonic minor, whatever that seemed to be what I was drawn to, and not the. I was never. If you can't say it's just a European thing, because I was never a
Yeah.
big Who fan or a Rolling Stones fan. Like I said, I always leaned
Well, do you
towards the
think it
Led
was the
Zeppelin.
drama? Like there was so much drama in that music where it was almost and even the tide of the classical music where
Yeah.
you'd listen to a classical piece and there was a journey that was happening,
Yeah.
I remember to this day I can't get it out of my memory bank of the first time I listened to the Marching Out record front to back
Mhm.
and just feeling like I wasn't where I was. I was somewhere else. Like this is,
Right.
you know, some curtain has been pulled back and I'm in this other thing. And your statement about the Bon Jovis and the that kind of where it was, hey, how you doing? We're doing this,
Yeah.
and then it's over. It's I think it was something that Sean Penn said, and I know I'm really drawing a bizarre parallel here, but he said, movies with happy endings can sometimes make you feel more alone than you did before you saw it.
Hmm.
And there is a great energy to Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, and even that Van Halen
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, you know, I oddly enough, Van Halen Eddie's soloing didn't pull me in. It was actually the first Van Halen song I ever heard was "Running with the Devil" before I heard
Yeah.
Eruption. And when I heard Eruption, I was like, can we go back and listen to Running with the Devil again? Because I
Right.
love that harmony, that big, because I was a Queen guy. I
Yeah.
listened to Queen all the time. So I love the theatrics in the music. I'm not talking about the stage show, just the music itself. And I heard that in Ingve's music, that
Yeah.
there was this theatrical world that was being created with those the scales, the modality
Hmm.
that he used.
Well,
Um,
two things I should mention. It's funny you said marching out. Marching out for a long time. I mean, I only had a cassette player in my car. I wore out 3 marching out cassette tapes, and I think when I
did you?
finally was trying to start learning to play, it's funny. I told you I didn't start learning to play until I was almost 27. I'd been married like 2 years or so with my wife. But
Okay.
I remember I walked into a music store and they had a Hal Leonard tab book, I think by Wolf Marshall, of marching out.
Yes.
was like the first tab book I ever bought. And I said, I need somebody to help teach me to play guitar. And that here in Florida, they had a music school teacher, a guitar teacher. So I said, hey, can I sign up for like 6 weeks of classes? And I walked in. The first thing he said was, well, what do you know? I said, I know nothing. He said, really? Well, you're older than most of my students. I said, I know. I regret that I didn't start doing this 12 years ago or whatever. But I'd like to have to learn something. He said, well, what kind of style would you like to play? Would you like to play country music? I said, I showed him the book I just bought. I said, I want to learn how to play this stuff. And he stopped for a minute. And he said, sir.
He said, sir.
Yeah, sir, if I could teach you how to play that, I wouldn't be working in this music store.
Wow.
So for the next 6 weeks, what really happened was very little hands-on training. All he really taught me was like the major and natural minor scale in 7 box positions.
Okay.
When I say 7 box positions, it was basically starting on every one of the scale notes. Forming a box from any note on the scale. A lot of times I see in textbooks they try to divide this, use a 5 scale box pattern, but this was literally, and there's a lot of overlap, of course, when you do that. Anyway,
sure.
So and in music theory, we sat down saying, well, let me explain to you how you stack triads, and this is why this is a minor chord, this is a major chord.
Right.
And then that's where I made my first mistake in life. I tried to take that information and start right off the bat creating my own music. Now, I say it's a mistake.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, why would you consider that a mistake?
Well, because I learned a lot of things wrong and did not learn and took a lot longer to learn stuff than you would. Everybody else I've talked to in the world pretty much says they learn by imitation. You learn by imitation first and then take it beyond that. I think most people I know, and I can't speak for yourself, maybe you can answer, but most people say, hey, I was imitating something kind of at first, and then I took it further or modified it or whatever. But I was kind of like, in my mind, saying, hey, I need to make up for lost time. I should have started playing 15 years ago. So if I want to write any music or something, I need to start writing that now. It's like, well,
I got you.
Okay,
yeah.
So I wasted a lot of time that way, wisdom of hindsight.
But do you think that if you had learned, let's just say if you had learned 3 or 4 Yngwie songs and were able to play them, do you think that would have changed things? Or
I think perhaps, because here's another funny story. I 7 or 8 years later, I released my first, solo CD.
Okay.
And at that time that I did that, I think it's had like 6 songs on it. At that point in time, I had never learned to play any other artist's song from beginning to end and with solos note for note.
Right. Okay.
It was years later when I finally said, you know what? I have been playing bits and pieces off the Marching Out album. I've been playing bits and pieces off of whatever, Paul Gilbert music. But I've never sat there and said, hey, let me take the next 2 weeks or so and just actually learn the entire song, play the rhythm through all the way, but much like I was doing my own multi-track, and then come back and do the lead of the whole song. I never took time to learn other people's songs from beginning to end until years after I actually done my own CD of original music. And I think
that was the second.
I'm trying to think who else I knew. There a famous guitarist who said he had a similar issue where he really never learned. And I'm certainly not comparing myself to him because after all these years, I still consider myself mediocre. But it was interesting. There's some I can't think who it is now. Who said I never learned to play anybody else's solos note for note. I always caught the vibe of it.
That was Eddie Van Halen.
Oh, that was Van Halen? Okay. All right.
Eddie Van Halen said that. Yeah. I remember him saying, even when they were a cover band, long, back in the earlier 70s.
Okay.
He was morphing it,
Yeah.
And I mean, that was, I'm not lumping myself in with him at all, but that was my thing too. I never, when I started studying, Michael, it never occurred to me to play somebody else's music. I remember my first guitar teacher. She was great, Nancy Vogel, She was really good. She could really play, and I didn't know anything, And she's like, okay, here, and she decided I'm gonna teach you chords through songs. She taught me two songs in the beginning, which was "Sweet Home Alabama" and "Paranoid," because she asked me, "Oh, what are you into?" I said, "I listen to Skinner and Sabbath," and I remember her reaction. She said, "That's a weird combination." I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Why? Am I not supposed to listen to both of those?" She goes,
Right.
"Doesn't matter here." So she shows me this, and she had like perfect pitch. I mean, she would play this stuff note for note perfectly. So I would take it home and I'd write my own song with it. Like I'd mess around with it and get to, oh, okay. Came back the next week and I said, okay, I wrote a song and I played it. She goes, that's not Sweet Home Alabama. I was like, no, I know. It's my song.
Yeah.
And she got really mad at me. She's like, your assignment was to learn the song. I'm like, oh, okay. And she's like, well, what did you work on Paranoid? I was like, yeah, I wrote another song. And it went on like this for a long time. But that's what I always thought when I was young was that,
Yeah.
well, those songs already exist. Why am I going to play those?
Well, see, there's a lot. I mean,
And
there's a logic to that
you know,
too. I mean, there's certainly a logic to that, and that's what I was thinking is why should I? I'm not going to make a living in a cover band. Why should I spend all this time learning somebody else's song? It's already been done.
right?
But what I'm saying now is I realize now I could have learned a lot of things faster by not trying to figure
That's
out everything myself, but learn by imitation and then stretch it. So I
I
probably
get
lost a
no,
lot of years and time. That's what I was trying to say.
no, and I agree with you. Like I understand where that's coming from in terms of learning how. Like, oh wow, that's why, or this moves this way. This chord progression works. Oh, I see. Okay, or even like learning a song and saying, okay, play that riff in all 12 keys. Or permutate it and then get. So no, I understand what you're saying. Um,
Just like something else you can appreciate. Another area where I wasted time, here again, not having good teaching or whatever, is, I was getting into it late, and I was also getting into that airing when everything was alternate picking, alternate picking. Paul Gilbert's classic instructional video had come out about
oh,
that
the
time. About
first
the time
one,
I was,
rock chops.
yeah,
Oh
yeah, yeah, licks, 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 licks.
my
And
god, that thing was so groundbreaking.
so
It
I looked
still
back and
is.
oh yeah, it's a very great place for people to play that style. It's great. I mean, it's excellent.
Yeah.
It's entertaining and it's one of the best of the best. But I took probably just, like I said, my mind is naturally scientific, not as easily, the old left brain, right thing. I'm probably
Yeah.
80% logic, Mr. Spock, scientific, 20%
Okay.
arts and creative. And so I literally took it that, hey, they say you're supposed to alternate pick everything. All right, so be it. That's what you're supposed to do. And
Right.
so in hindsight, it seems crazy now because now we have YouTube, guys out there such as yourself, Troy Grady, all these guys out there teaching stuff. You've got software like Guitar Pro where you can see the tabs, that something that may have taken old timers like us a month listening, you can pick it up in 5 minutes, go, that's what they're doing, assuming the tab's right. But now I look now at much time I may have spent. I mean, there's some licks, I hate to admit it, it's going to make me look like I'm incompetent, where I worked on them for a year. It's like, I just can't get this. Well, now looking at it and seeing how they're structured and knowing about pick mechanics now, I go, hey, dumbass, there's almost no way you're going to be able to pick that with alternate picking the way it was tabbed in that book. The tab was wrong, and it just didn't lend itself to fast alternate picking. You're going to have to do a little bit of economy in there to pull it off.
Well, there's two things in that I find really interesting. Uh, what you just said about that too. Like not only when this stuff came out. So I go back to Greg Howe, and I spent some time with him, studying with him, and he was telling me about the first time he heard Eruption, He was hearing this. There were no tabs available. There was there was no YouTube, nothing. Obviously, uh, the first time he heard it, he had no idea that Eddie was tapping it. So he sat with this and figured a way to play it without tapping it because he was just going by what he was hearing, the notes. When he later saw him live, he saw what Eddie was doing. He was like, oh, okay. So that's one thing. So
Yeah.
in some cases, and you and I have talked about this before, even with Paul, where, Paul, instead of sweeping, he'll string skip it because it just physiology works better for him in that context. Now, if that, if you're learning the stuff from the record, it lends itself to developing your own techniques and style. Like I asked Greg once about this one thing he was doing. This I call it the worm, where he collapses the third finger to get that fourth interval. He'll race it up the neck. And he got it because when he was listening to Eddie, as I said before, he didn't know Eddie was tapping. So he figured that's what Eddie was doing because he didn't know.
Yeah.
But in that one instance, he created a style that didn't exist before that.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind. So, and on that same token, if you think of, and believe me, I'm not going to shit on tabs. I mean, I love them. I mean, all my lessons are done that way. But if you were to look at something like, say, you were to look at a Chick Corea piano solo in notation, then you have to interpret that to the instrument. That is completely up to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody else tabbed it, they're going to tab that to their comfort. But if you did it, if we did it, our individual selves did it, then we find these new ways of doing things, and we find where our strengths are. So we find strengths.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, finish what you're saying.
But we find the strengths in the actual limitation of what's available.
Yeah.
No,
what you're saying is 100% right. The thing is, I was well into my 30s or so before I really learned that. And this is at the risk of making myself look naive. Remember, I came from a science background primarily, where the science is very exact. So me starting out trying to learn, already being 27 years old, coming from a world of science where it's very exact, when I bought a Hal Leonard book that says it's the official tablature, like I said, this is going to be laughable to some people watching this now who know better. And of course, it's laughable to me now saying the story. But at the time, I was thinking, all right, if this is the official tablature, that means they sat down with the artist and the artist explained to them, this is how I play this. And that's why it's the official tablature. Sitting here today, that's ridiculous and laughable. But if you don't know any better, you're teaching yourself and you're buying this thing that's called the official. In my mind, I'm taking it to, hey, in the case of Marching Out, hey, Wolf Marshall and the Hal Leonard Company paid Yngwie to sit down and say, show us how you play these songs. And that was the official. Well, now from those tab books, as good as they are, some of that stuff, if you try to play it as it's tabbed, you'll be,
Yeah. But I mean, they were extremely well done.
Yeah.
I remember when you were talking about earlier about the magazine with the little record cutout that you could take, right?
Yeah.
That's Guitar Player. Yeah. My exposure to Yngwie was Guitar for the Practicing Musician, where they had the transcription to Black Star in its entirety with performance notes. This is what fascinated me about, and they don't do that anymore. And I believe it was either Andy Altord or Jesse Gress. I can't remember who did the transcription, but it was funny because I had a subscription to this magazine, and you'd see performance notes to any other artist, and they were like 2 paragraphs, but the performance notes to Yngwie's Black Star took up 2 pages.
Yeah.
The breakdown of the theory of what he's using, what scale he was using, and all this kind of stuff. And And I was new to tablature then myself. I was
Mhm.
like, I'm looking at this going, what is this? This is still when the notation was above it, but
Sure.
I'm looking at the tablature because the tablature presented, and I'm gonna interject this into this part of our conversation, is that I have a keyboardist that I work with named Eric Svalgaard, and we directed a rock school together for a decade. And he was a big Frank Zappa, King Crimson, real prog guy. So my job was to teach these students that he had all the guitar parts of this stuff. Now we had to tab them, right? But he came to me one day and he said, and I said, because obviously he's a keyboard player. Everything's notated. He's only reading notes. He's reading the notation. Or he's writing everything out in notation. So he would come into my lesson room and he said, Chris, tab everything. Tab this out.
Mhm.
And my tab turnaround time was at that point legendary. Like
Yeah.
I could take a piece of score and tab it in. So I said, Eric, I feel kind of funny like tabbing all this stuff out. Do you think you want to have your students learn to actually sight read the notation? And he says something very profound to me. He said, I think guitar tab is a legitimate thing because I don't know if you've heard this, but tab gets shit on. People
Mhm.
they shit on tab. They're like, tab, you should learn to sight read. And I agree that sight reading is important. But he said to me, he says, the grand staff is tab for the piano. It's
Yeah.
tab for the piano. He said tablature completely makes sense because even if is even if you were able to write out the options, but still, the reason, and even in classical guitar music, you see numbers above the notes because they're
Mhm.
telling you what position to play in.
Yeah.
Well, because sight reading on the guitar is a lot harder notative
Exactly.
wise, right? Because there's multiple places to play. So tablature is notation for the guitar. I'm
And
saying that,
that's the counter argument I've always heard. The counter argument
yeah,
I've always heard to defend tab was if with piano, that one note appears one place on the piano and that's it.
exactly right. Yeah,
This same
very
note
true.
can appear several places on the guitar. So the tablature is not just the note, but how the
It's
note and where the note. And so,
Yep.
um,
And it's
that's why
also
I think
it's the whole scenery. It's the
yeah.
arc of what's there. So I don't um being here in Philly, amongst the jazz players here that would be the first to say tab. Why would you use that? Um,
Mhm.
but I've always said it's a very valued. It has value. It really does. But at the same time, having said that, I do believe that the value that it possesses equally, I think the guitar players should understand where all their notes are on the fretboard because it
Mhm.
gives you the option. Like you
Mhm.
said, you're like, well, I spent a year working on this piece. But if you had the option of refingering it or repositioning it that worked with your physiology, and I'm a big proponent in physiology, like
Yeah.
you look at Paul Gilbert. I I'm going to venture to say that you would never see Paul pick from the elbow
Right.
because physically it couldn't happen because his wrist joint is so because of his size.
Yeah.
What is he like 6'8"?
No, he's not that tall. But he's like 6'5",
6'5". Okay, I'll give you
and
6. Yeah,
very and obviously very thin.
yeah, But then you meet someone like Vinnie Moore,
Hmm.
who's like 5'7", 5'6", 5'7", compact. He's built like a tank, and it's coming from here, and it makes sense for him. I can listen to Vinnie Moore's. He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So to say, okay, this is the only technique you can use on the guitar, in this genre, I don't think it's possible. Like I
No,
think that
you're 100% right. What I was alluding to earlier was me being too strict, trying to teach myself from the tablature that was out at the time and the instructions alternate pick, that I may have come up with another way to do it, but I stopped. Right. Nowadays, I think, why would you do that? If it works, it works. But since I was trying to teach myself, and here again, the scientific mindset, I was thinking, well, I must be. I'm learning wrong. I'm learning wrong because the official guidebook, like here again, in my world of chemistry, you know what to blend together so you don't blow yourself up. So it's very, science is very precise. It's not very forgiving. So if this said that I'm supposed to play it this way, and it's always alternate picking, and it's supposed to be this fingering combination, well, I better not do it any other way because that's the way it says it should be done. It's absurd now. Right. Absurd to us now. But if you're trying to learn for the first time with no friends at play or whatever, you're in your own little vacuum with the book you think is supposed to be teaching you the right way. You keep trying to force yourself to do the right way. Sometimes to find out later, well, the tab was wrong in some cases, or no, that's probably not the best, easiest way to do that. Or the only way to do it. Or the only way to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what happened with Greg. When he finally saw Eddie tap, he was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I don't have to do that anymore, Right. I mean, even though he incorporated it into what he did, but I find it fascinating that, in some ways, same way. I know the book that you're speaking of, and I remember poring over some of it at one point and thinking, wow, I don't think Yngwie physically played it this way. He might have, done it this way. And doing the Yngwie tribute as long as I did, I really got into how he physically did it. But having said that, those books were phenomenal. I thought they were well done and well put together.
Well, especially considering the time period, because he's relatively still the new thing.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine being a transcriber and that comes across your desk?
And as I recall, Wolf Marshall did a lot of those. So overall, they're good.
Yeah, Wolf did the book. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And obviously, Wolf Marshall's. Obviously, there's some things that we now know weren't played the way they are, but overall, the books are very good. I think the worst tab in the world, honestly, you can either affirm this or disagree. To me, the worst tabs I've ever seen in the world are the ones that come from Japan.
I don't think I've seen those.
Well, the reason I saw so many of them is when I was managing Yngwie, every time he had a new album come out, the Japanese would have full band scores, where it was not just his guitar, but the bass tab, the drums tab, the keyboards tabbed. They'd be pretty thick books. And they were like for every album back then, Seventh Sign, whatever. And it was full band scores from Doremi. And I'd look at those and it was like, knowing what Wolf Marshall had done, playing some of it myself, and having sat side by side with Yngwie in his home studio watching play, I'm looking at the Japanese tab going, no. They're the right notes. They're the right notes, but I don't know. And like I said, you know the high respect I have for you and the envy I have for your playing ability. But the way some of this stuff was tabbed, I don't even know if you could have played it.
Probably not. Yes. Well, it's funny. It's almost, especially if you're talking about the scoring kind of thing. It's I've had students that come to me that are doing pit band gigs, and they show me these scores, and they're sweating bullets. They're freaking out. They're like, "What am I looking at here?" And I said, "This arranger isn't a guitar player." Mm-hmm. So the arranger would write this stuff out that was so not only unguitaristic, it was just, look, when you see that symbol, this is what you play. Like, this is the reality, Right. So that would happen where, you're faced with this, the score that's just not, from the guitar standpoint, not realistic, because, most of the arrangers are pianists. So they're sitting there going, okay. Here's the voicing for the G major 7 sharp 11, and it's like, yeah, no, guitar's not going to do that voicing.
Right.
It's,
Right.
you know, so that's fascinating. I had no idea that they were doing that with Ingve's material, where they were scoring the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they love Ingve,
Yeah.
you know, no question about that. So, and I want to get back to the Ingve thing too. I want to get into that with you. So, what year did you release your first original music? And did you have a band? Did you put a band
No,
together for that?
no
No.
band. I did it all myself. I think it was 1995, I think.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
And no, I programmed a Yamaha RY30 drum machine,
Yeah.
and it was actually a pretty good drum machine at the time because it had sound cards that went with it, where they had gone to a
Yep.
studio and sampled like Tommy Aldridge, Neil Peart
Yep.
sound cards, and Matt Sorum. So I programmed the drum machine, recorded all the guitars and bass at home, and tried to work with some singers actually to put vocals to it.
Okay.
And obviously, it was at that time, it was hard to coordinate it or whatever. So I ended up just doing them as instrumentals.
Okay.
And
And is that available someplace? Is that still
every now and then you'll see it pop up on eBay or something. On my own personal website, I may have uploaded 2 or 3 of the songs just to hear. On there also, they were recorded on a Tascam 488 multi-track.
yes.
That was the old Porta Studio that used a cassette tape to do 8 tracks on a cassette tape.
Yep.
So you didn't have the greatest. It's surprisingly good sounding for what it was, but 8 tracks on the width of a cassette tape had some limited audio quality.
Yeah, well, you got it's quarter inch. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had the Tascam, but it was reel to reel.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I wrote Temple of Solomon on that machine, which
Okay.
was, in my neoclassical thing, that's the one tune that everybody requests. If I'm live, everyone's like, "Hey, play Temple
Right.
of Solomon," which was just me. I think
Was
I
it
had
like
gotten.
you say it was the Tascam reel to reel
Yep,
8 track
8-track.
or 16?
Yeah.
So it was the TSR 8.
Yes.
Okay, I actually had one. I grew up from the Porta Studio, and then my second CD was done on a Tascam TSR8.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the headroom on that stuff because I printed
Yeah.
stuff hot on that. Like I went
Yeah.
into the red on that, and I loved the sound of it. It took me a while to get used to the digital when I went over to digital and couldn't print hot. Like I had to be real
Right.
careful. Like, oh Jesus, here we go. But but yeah, I love that. I love that machine. I gave it to a bass player who we was working with, and he was like, I really want to start writing, and I had already moved on to digital workstations. And I said, here, if you can find a place to go get some quarter-inch tape laying around, then go for it. But I have a whole library downstairs of everything I've ever done on that machine, like on a shelf. It's just like it's like a little vault of stuff. Never released it, but it's down there. So when was okay? So you're playing guitar, you're releasing this stuff, but you're doing something else with your life at this point too.
Well,
You're
like I said,
doing
the guitar was only a hobby, and always has
okay.
been. It never, like I said, even I never even thought of going into music or acting or anything like that as a career, even when I was young. To me, that was something that people out in California did. My mind never went there.
Okay.
Now, my career, I originally, when I went to college, I originally thought I was going to be a doctor. But
Really?
like I said, Yeah, I thought I was going to be a doctor, and I started off that way. So I mean, I started studying all the biology classes, working with the cadavers, um, with the human cadavers in college, undergraduate, and that's the direction I was going. But I think I mentioned I was working my way through college. And so I started in high school. As soon as I was legally old enough to work, I started working close to full time, 32 or 36 hours a week while I was in high school. And then, of course, during the
Okay.
summer, I would really rack up the hours. And all during college, I was also working full time. So I'd have classes in the morning, get to off my last class at 2 o'clock, get to work by 3, work from 3 to 11, come home, try to squeeze in an hour or so worth of homework, then get back ready for class at 7:30 the next morning. And that's what I had to do for 4 years.
Wow.
I wasn't the greatest. I'll be honest, I was not the greatest student as far as GPA, but I guess to my credit, I took almost all the tests without really much study time because I was working so much. As a matter of fact, my guidance counselors would call me in from time to time and say, Mike, maybe you want to sign up for financial aid because we can tell you'd be a better student. But while everybody, all the other fellow students are here in the library jamming and cramming for these tests, you're out working a full-time job and taking these tests with no study, just based on what you absorbed during class. So you're passing, you're doing fine, but you could academically have a higher GPA or whatever. And I said, well,
Wow.
It can't be helped. It can't be helped. It's what I have to do to get through. And when I was my last junior or probably junior year, I started to realize this is not going to work. I was offered a small scholarship to Harvard, but it was like a $10,000 scholarship. And the problem was, it sounds nice, but $10,000 wouldn't go very far. I mean, so it was nice to be recognized, nice to have that offered, but it wouldn't come close to paying the bills you need for there. So that's when I made the change to say, all right, I'm not going to be able to do it, be a doctor, because there's no way. I'm barely paying for my car, my food. I always get jobs where I worked in restaurants because I figured that way all my money could go to pay for tuition, books, but I could at least always eat for free.
Right.
Working
Exactly.
Working as a restaurant as a cook, you can always sneak yourself an extra burger, or at the end of the night,
Yeah.
when I was working at Kentucky Fried Chicken, whatever was left at the end of the night, they would just toss out. So I'd grab a plastic bag and grab it real quick, and that's pretty much how I survived those 4 years. But that's when I made a decision: what am I going to do instead? And in life, it's funny how life is always like a crossroads. And I'm at the age now where I'm starting to get introspective about, or retrospective about my life. Not with regrets. I've had a good life, but I call it the what if syndrome. What if I had taken the road to the left instead of the road to the right? Where might I have been today? Well, computers, Apple had just come out with their first IIe, and we were using computers in college. And in my mind, I knew this is going to be the future. I'm right now studying biology and chemistry, the old sciences. The computers are going to be the future. I can see it. But here again, this is early 80s, and I'm living I'm going to college at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. We didn't have an internet. We didn't have Google, obviously, yet. You had the local library and newspapers. So I would say, what kind of jobs are out there for a computer person? Now, I've lived my whole life up to that point on the East Coast. So I'd go to the library and grab like the New York Times, the Miami Herald, the Atlanta Tribune, and I'd look and I go, man, there's not much out there for computer jobs. Here again, this is another case of the wisdom of being older now. We all know, well, of course I wasn't going to find anything. This was the early days when nobody knew who Bill Gates or Steve Jobs was yet, because Commodore 64s were still the biggest selling computers in the world. Apple was coming out with their IIe. So nobody knew Bill Gates or Microsoft or Apple yet. And all of the development for computers was happening on the West Coast in Silicon Valley. But how are you supposed to know that? Growing up in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, with no internet yet invented to look at. You go to the newspapers, what you think is big cities, New York, Miami. You go, hey, I don't see. I'm going to graduate here in about a year and a half, and I'm going to have some debt accumulated, and I need to start making some money fast.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just too early. If I was coming along later, maybe this would be a good industry. Now we look at that and say, well, if you'd have pursued it, who knows? maybe I'd have been the Steve Jobs or the Bill Gates today. I mean, you don't know, because you'd have been there on the early stages.
Right.
But I said, no, I need to play it safe. So I said, I've got all this science degree built up. I can't do pre-med. What is a hot thing right now that can use what I've already got credits for? Well, about that time, environmental hazard or the environmental protection was hot. Because this would have been like 82, 83. And a lot of people don't know that because at this stage in life, everybody just thinks the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has been around forever. Well, it hadn't. It didn't even exist until Nixon created the department like in 1974. And that was after the Love Canal. And that's really what triggered everything. You had the Love Canal up there in New York, children being born with a lot of birth defects, a lot of cancer. They looked into it, found all this hazardous waste, and realized that since the dawn of our industrial revolution, all these companies have just been burying stuff, because there was no there was no agency. I mean, there was no when the turn of the century when we started the industrial revolution, there was no rules about pollution. So all these 55-gallon drums of toxic waste that were just being buried in fields or dumped in rivers. And it wasn't until the early 70s that all of a sudden we started to see the problem. So suddenly that was the big spur. The EPA created was created in 1974. But it took a few years for them to figure out what are we going to do. We have to write some rules. We got to write some regulations. We got to figure out how do you go about cleaning this stuff up and incinerating it and burning it. So that was good timing because right in the early 80s, the environmental cleanup business was just kicking off. And when you think about the reason the industry was so big, let's think about it. In the 1800s, you're riding horses and buggies. Early 1900s, suddenly you've got cars, you've got factories, you've got DuPonts, you've got whatever. And then all of that, 1900s, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940, all the way up to 1970, that's 70 years of nothing but the growth of America, really, from the horse and buggy and Civil War days, the industrial, the building in New York City, everything. But all that waste has just been buried somewhere. So when the environmental cleanup industry and testing got started in the early 80s, you had a 70-year backlog of work to do.
Wow.
And so I went ahead and changed my degree to a chemistry degree, and getting a job was pretty easy. I saw an advertisement in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, or Miami. They said they wanted a chemist. That's all they said, a bachelor degree chemist. So I called the number, and I said, "Hi, I saw the advertisement for you. You need a chemist in Miami, Florida, for this environmental lab." He says, "You have a chemistry degree?" I said, "Yeah." "When can you be here?" I said, "I can be here in 2 weeks." "You're hired." And that was right there at the take of all the industry. And that's really how I ended up going into that industry, really.
And what was your initial, so you land your first day at work. Mm-hmm. What are you faced with?
Well, as a new chemist, they had me doing mostly some of the simpler tests.
Okay.
The more basic tests, not using the fancy instrumentation or anything. At first I was intimidated. I had basically at that point just barely made it through college. I think that the day I drove to Florida for that job, I had everything I owned in the back seat of this same set 1970 Volkswagen Beetle, about $100 to my name in my pocket. And I was staying at a hotel near the beach that at that time it was $80 a week. It's a cheap hotel.
Mm-hmm.
The TV didn't work. Your entertainment night was listening to the local call girls bring their clients in next door.
Right.
And I basically had to stay there. Well, actually, I might have stayed there a lot longer. But what happened was back then, I mean, $80 a week is cheap. You got to remember this was the 80s. But it was off season, and they basically said, "Hey, starting the week after next, it's the season. So $80 a week turns into $80 a night."
Oh my God!
Yeah. So that's how off season for hotels worked back then.
Yeah.
So I scrounged the money together to get my first low efficiency apartment, and
you had a gig. You were doing this thing, and then that morphed into your own business. At what point did you make that your own business?
Well, I think the fact that I had to work my way through college gave me a different insight to a lot of things, dealing with people and thinking about business. And the reason I say that is, uh, like I said earlier, I had to work my way through um, college. All the other people in my chemistry class, they were driving cars that their parents had bought for them. They were partying on campus, and they could all get together in a group and do overnight jam and cram sessions for a test. So I was always the odd man out. I wasn't part of that group. And also, I seem to have a exposure to a different cross section of people, because you deal with a certain type of person when you're on a college campus dealing with college professors, maybe some privileged kids, who don't have to work. They have everything paid for. Just get good grades, Johnny. Just do good. And that's a different class of people, not meaning good or bad, but a different mindset. Then all of a sudden, I'm now working cutting poultry in a poultry plant, or frying chicken in a Kentucky Fried Chicken, or working the weekend shift at a 7-Eleven, because they didn't want the girls working late for safety reasons. They'd rather have a guy running Friday or Saturday night than a girl by herself in a 7-Eleven.
Sure.
So all of a sudden, during the day, you're dealing with these intellectuals, and then you're going to work side by side, cutting chicken guts with a plastic apron. Very humbling, because nowadays, I mean, I could get into a whole speech about how the United States economy has gone in the wrong direction by artificially creating a need for illegal labor by not making our own citizens do this kind of jobs, which I always called them character building. And in my mind, I always thought of it. I said, I hate this job. I hate it. I hate it. This is what drives me to try to do better, so I don't have to do this my whole life. My thought being that as I move on up in my life, some younger person will be coming in to fill my shoes behind me. It's their stepping stone. And it seems like in today's society, we remove that because people say, well, I'm not going to let my kid do a job like that. Let some immigrant do it. And see, that was character building. But I'm not going to get into the whole politics of that. But
no. But
I always look at it. I always look at it as we created an artificial need. And people say we need, to do this. It's like, no, we didn't used to. Trust me. When I was working there on a rotary saw, cutting chicken, everybody beside me was a native-born American. There was no foreigners. The point is, right or wrong, we did used to do those jobs. But somewhere along the line, we decided to say, no, we're not going to do them anymore. So let's bring these people in to do them so we can sit back and not have to do them. And I think that was wrong because, to me, it built character, because there were times, like I was offered a Kentucky Fried Chicken, for example. They were getting ready to expand in Australia. And they said, you're really good here. Would you like to move to Australia and manage a Kentucky Fried Chicken store? And I'll be honest, I played with the idea because I was getting burned out between working full time and trying to keep up college. And I thought, it'd be easier for me to dump college, take this job, and I'll have a secure job right off the bat, and I get to move to Australia. But there's something that says that's a short-term step, but long-term, where are you? So I'd go back to cutting the chicken guts or working the convenience stores or working the restaurants. And like I said, I can remember, I know it sounds funny or graphic, but I remember, almost gagging from the smell of, pieces of chicken and chicken gizzards up to about your knees with this plastic apron with blood dripping down it. It just gets this, after a while, rank, and I'm thinking, all right, keep doing this, because this is paying for you to one day be able to walk away from this and do something more.
But do something more.
Yeah, and you're dealing with a different class of people.
Yeah.
So,
well, I remember distinctly, very clearly, I was 14, and 14 or 15. I all I know is I didn't know my driver's license yet, but my father, his parents were in a bad way. They were, getting ready to pass, and my dad was the power of attorney, so he would have me drive the car while he's doing all this paperwork, which was completely new to him. So we're driving one day, and we pull into this parking lot, And there's this pawn shop there. I said, "Hey, Dad, do you mind if I go in and take a look and see what's in there?" He was like, "Yeah, go ahead." So I walk in there. 1979 Fender Stratocaster and a 19, I don't remember the year, but it was a Gibson Explorer hanging together. The Fender Strat was $400. The Gibson was $500. And I'm looking at this thing. And I said, "Dad, man, I really want that guitar." And my dad, being the badass that he was like, "Chris, I would love nothing more than to just buy that guitar for you." He goes, "But then I got to buy your sister something." He goes, "That's going to break my bank. Can't make that happen." So he said, "Man, I don't know, man. You'd have to get a gig or something like that." So the next day, it was the summer. Next day, I'm walking to my girlfriend's house at the time, and I have to walk down State Street, which is just nothing but bars and restaurants. It's around 10 in the morning. I walk in to this place called Packy's. The establishment's still there. It's still an Irish bar. Um, I walk in and there's this guy behind the bar going, "Hey, yo, can I help you? What are you doing?" It's the 80s. This 14-year-old kid walks in at 10 in the morning. He's like into a bar. And I said, "Hey, you need a dishwasher or anything?" Because I had, like, the only thing I saw was that Fender Stratocaster.
Right.
I kept seeing it. And he goes, "Hey, how old are you?" His name was Tony, Italian,
Okay.
which is really weird running an Irish pub.
Yeah.
He's like, "Yo, how old are you?" And I was like, I said, "I'm 14. I said, "I guess I don't have a gig." And he's like, "Hey, I tell you what, I'll give you the lunch shift. Can you be here tomorrow at 9?" I was like, "Yeah." I was there at quarter of, and I worked the next whole summer, loving every minute of it, because just as you said, all I kept seeing was that Fender Strat. Now, and I was on a time, because it's a pawn shop. The guy's not holding it for me. The first person that comes in is going to buy it is going to buy
Right.
it. So I'm doing this thinking that it may not even be there, but because I'm working under the table, I'm not even supposed to be doing what I'm doing. I'm like handling booze, I'm doing all that stuff. But he's paying me cash. 2.5 weeks later, I walk in and it's still there. Man, I handed that cash. And I'm going to tell you something, Michael, just like you said, my onus of that instrument was mine.
Yeah.
I did that.
Mm-hmm.
I did that. Like I did that, and I think that's important that,
Yeah, it is.
and you, like you said, that's your drive. It's like, I have a goal, and this is something I can see, and I can, whatever that end of that rainbow is. I mean, mine's a lot more minuscule than yours, but it was like, 1979 Fender Strat with case.
Yeah.
I want to sit there and shovel through broken glass and broken dishes and make this happen. So I think it's really cool. I think that's really important. You know. So at what point did it become yours? Like, where did you? So now you're in Florida now, right? Keeping my
Yes.
timeline together.
This is 84 or 85.
And is that when you
1984.
started your own business at this point?
No. I would have just been out of college at that point, working that first job. And
So
I'll
you're
try to give
working
you
the
a short.
first gig.
Yeah, I'm working the first out of but the first job out of college actually uses my degree as a chemist. And I remember at first being, the first 6 months, I didn't say much of anything. I just tried to keep my head low, learn, and whatever. But then after a while, I started seeing things I thought could be done better. So I'd go up to the bosses and I'd say, "Hey, I think I see a way we can be more productive." And as a matter of fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to tell you a story that everybody loves. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story everybody loves about when I was still working my way through college, because that ties
Okay.
into this part here. When I was at Kentucky Fried Chicken, we were in one of the highest volume stores in Virginia, and we had these things called it's a big pressure cooker. It would cook what was it, 20 whole birds at one time.
Oh my
Cut.
God.
They were cut, but you had 5 trays. You'd bread the chicken. You'd lay it on the tray. There's 5 trays with the equivalent of 20 whole chickens at one time in 15 minutes. that was the original recipe. Every 15 minutes, you could have 20 whole birds of original recipe cooked. It was a giant thing about the size of a Cadillac. Big hydraulic lifts. You would load the racks of chicken. The hydraulics would put it down to 150 pounds of shortening under pressure, and the thing would open up. But this store was still running out of chicken, even with that machine running. And because what happened is when that chicken came up, you start breading the next one. And then you'd go and you'd lose like 20 minutes of downtime in between. And so I started saying, well, wait a minute. I'm going to start breading the next 5 while that is cooking. And then, there's 2. If you remember the old days, you had original recipe and extra crispy.
Mm-hmm.
Almost nobody bought extra crispy. I mean, 90% of the people bought original recipes. You had these 2 little cookers for the extra crispy. So what I said one day was, hey, extra crispy guy, you're going to be the unloader. The moment that machine comes up, in addition to taking care of cooking your few birds for extra crispy, you take the handles and pull that finished chicken off and take it up to the front so the girls can fill orders. I'm immediately going to have 5 of them breaded, turn right around, put it on, and put that button back down. No, like a pit stop at a car race.
Yep.
And all of a sudden we were able to about double the production. And one day, and it was working great. They even had mystery shoppers that come in from corporate KFC to test the quality of the food, the freshness, and we always won the award.
Wow.
The white glove. And so we always won the award. There was no problems. But one day the regional manager came in and he saw me doing that. He says, "Young man, stop what you're doing." I said, "What? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm pre-breading the chicken so it'll be ready to load at the moment the oven comes up, and my man over here takes the stuff off." He says, No, you don't do that. I said, "Why not?" The KFC manual states that you do not begin breading the first piece of chicken until everything is unloaded off the other machine. I said, "Why?" "Because the manual says." I said, "No, what is the functional reason for that?"
Right. Yeah.
"Because that is the KFC way." I said, "Sir, I'm not trying to be difficult. What I'm saying is, what is the logical reason for it? It doesn't affect the freshness, as evidenced by the whole wall of plaques and awards we've got from your corporate mystery shoppers. We're now the biggest volume store in the state.
Right.
And we no longer have people waiting for the stuff to come out. I mean, we got like moving." He says, "Son, you're not going to do that anymore." And I said, "Well, this store's going to probably go back to having the problems it did before." And he says, "Well, I'm telling you," he says, "you're not going to do that anymore." I said, "Well, I'm not trying to be difficult, but when we're young, we're always a little bit belligerent and stubborn." I said, "Sir, I don't want me to defy you, but please tell me the real reason why we're doing this. Right. Not just it's a couple words on a piece of paper. There's got to be reason behind the words."
Right.
And he says, "That's all you need to know." And I said, "Well, sir, let me ask you a question. If that book told you, or that KFC manual said every time I cook a piece of chicken, I got to jump around on one leg going ooey, 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 would you do it?" He says, "By God, young man, I would." And I said,
"Really?"
"Yeah." And I said, "Sir, I'm sorry. I can't work with that mentality." Now I'll be honest, I would never do that as an older, more mature person, quit under those grounds. But at that time, still being young and thinking you know it all, I walked out and quit and went to work at 7-Eleven the next day. But here's the moral of the story, though. Now that was that college kid. Now I'm bringing you back to the present, so what I'm telling you makes more sense. So I'm now working at this job at this environmental testing lab, one of the bigger ones in the Miami area. And I kept seeing things that seemed inefficient to me. And I quickly realized why. And I don't want to bore you with too much details, but you'll see there's maybe some business tips here that'll help other people watching this and other endeavors. At that time, it seemed that all of these environmental labs were being run the way a college professor would run a business if he had one. And what I mean by that is they would open at 9, close at 5. They wouldn't run any tests on the weekend. If you, for example, were worried about how much lead you had in your drinking water at home, you had to drive your sample to the lab. And then they would tell you, you'll get your results in a month.
Wow.
And so it seemed to have this very, I don't know, banking mentality, or a business that was being run by academics. if that makes any sense. And maybe there's a
Yes.
reason for that, because in that early day, who were the people that were starting these laboratories? Certified chemists or whatever, because it was a new thing. But maybe this is where the fact that I had to work my way through school, and I worked in places like a Kentucky Fried Chicken, a factory, a poultry plant, whatever. I got the academic side, but I also got a feel for business and mass production and efficiency. It didn't exist in the science realm. They did everything like they were a bunch of lab geeks running a business. So I'd go and say, well, what if we did a second shift? We could, because once we leave at 5, the instruments stop working. That's unproductive. Oh, chemists don't work night shifts, sir, young man. I go, okay. And I said, here's another idea. Traffic's pretty bad in South Florida. And, you're always trying to figure out how to be better than the competition. What if we had some vans that would drive around and pick up samples from the clients? Wouldn't that make us so easy to use compared to them getting in traffic and driving 45 minutes to drop off a sample in a lab and drive home? And I said, also, why does it take a month for these customers to get the results back? We as chemists usually have everything done in 5 or 6 days. Where's it sitting for the next couple of weeks? Oh, they got to type the report. They got to do the invoicing. I said, but if I got lead in my drinking water, I'm worried. I don't want to wait a month to find out. He goes, we've been in business 26 years. This is how it's done. Now go back to your bench and do your tests. They just didn't really want to hear it. So I started keeping a notebook of ideas. Right. And fast forward, without beating this point to death and getting boring with it, the opportunity arose for me to leave with some other guys with an SBA loan and take a risk to start our own lab. And basically what I did was implement everything that I had been suggesting for the prior 5 years, saying, so on day 1, we had vans that went around and picked up samples. We promised, hey, if you bring us your sample on a Monday, you will have the results of the following Monday. Boom, count on it. We ran around the clock. If you went in there on a Saturday, you'd see chemists in white coats running tests on a Saturday. So we basically, when Monday morning came, there'd be a stack of reports like this ready to, of course, back then you were faxing stuff. You weren't emailing it yet, but fax to her. And the upside of that is it was very hard. I mean, don't get me wrong. We started running out of funding, and we had the classic tough business startups. I didn't take any real salary for the first 2 years, and we came close to not making it. We lived on my wife's salary. She was like the old story about behind every successful man, there's a good woman or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Which that was her, because she had her nursing job is what we lived on, and she would even come in on the weekends sometimes and help out with some of the sampling stuff. But eventually, the long story short is what we were doing was so different that the company I worked for that had been around for 20 some years went out of business 6 months later. I hired
really.
And
no way you hired half their staff on
and I had hired half the staff, and within 7 years we were called one of the largest in the state of Florida for that kind of company. So that's the long and short of it. But really what it came from was applying ideas from a different business where speed, production line. And I remember when we first opened, some of the other labs laughed at us saying, what are these guys trying to do? Be the Pizza Hut of laboratories? They're making us seem like we're not professional. We're supposed to be a professional business. We're not Pizza Hut or whatever. And guest speaker.
Hey, kitty.
And but here again, it was so alien to their way of thinking, because they were treating it like an academic lab that was a business. And all we did was say, it doesn't matter what you're producing. It could be a tennis shoe. It could be a laboratory result for a person. And the end result's the same: service, speed, quality, reliability.
Yeah, that's wild.
And, that can apply to a lot of different businesses, but it made the difference, in this one.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. Wow.
And that really, that's the whole story in a nutshell there.
Yeah, story of your business. You ended up selling that business.
Yes.
Right. So how long had you had that business? And
It took, yeah,
and there's a question tied with that. Is
okay.
when you started the business, was obviously your goal in the business was to make it efficient, to make it beneficial to the public, all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've heard this before from other colleagues that I've worked with over the years. Is it true that the idea of starting a business is to eventually sell it?
I mean, I probably everybody has different motivations. I mean, in my mind, it was,
Okay.
and there's two reasons, and there's two reasons for that. One is I've always believed in the old adage that nobody stays on top forever. You know, whether you're a
Interesting.
sports figure, whether you're a movie star, you have your time. You know, it's
You
called,
have
you
your
call
time.
it life is that way if you think about it, or even any kind of company. It comes from nothing, it grows, it peaks, then it begins to fade, and one day it finally returns to the earth and dies. That's not to be negative or anything, but I mean that's
No, no,
you know
I
if
get
you're
what
a,
you're
if you're
saying.
yeah, but if you're a boxer and you're Mike Tyson, you know, you're not going to be the best forever. So for a business aspect, I think the smartest thing to do is try to go out on top. Now I say that, but a gentleman that's a good friend of mine, that he does not have that same belief. He started a
Okay.
company very similar to my own, long before mine, about the same time as my former employer. I think he started probably about 43 years ago. He's always maintained it as he's the president and owner and the founder, and he's still running it today. And he never took
Okay.
much time away. Now his kids, when they moved out of the house, his wife pressured him a little bit and said, "Hey, let's do something for ourselves now that we have the time. You've been, you know, running this business since you started 40 some years ago. Why don't you take
Wow.
some time off?" And because he loves it, for him, the business, you know, is his life too. He enjoys it. It's not just a business. And so he took the first extended break in 2019, and he actually called me up and asked me if I would step in his absence for a year and act as the acting president, which I took that with a lot of responsibility because I'm thinking this is his baby. I mean, this man has started this company 40 years ago. He's the owner and president. He's never stepped away, but he's willing to trust me to come in and run it in his absence for a year. So I took that one pretty serious, and I treated his company that year like it was my own. Just you know, because I felt a little bit of pressure and a lot of responsibility to do it right. But
Right.
he's the kind of guy I was talking to him this past week, and it's funny how we're different. To answer your question, he was saying, "Well, what do you do with your time?" And I said, "I'm going to be honest. You would think that I have a lot of it. I still don't have enough time to do all the things I'd like to do." And his comment
Interesting.
was, "Well, that year I almost went crazy because after he owns an airplane, flying an airplane, going to some amusement parks, going on some vacations. He's after doing that. I felt like I was just stuck at home watching TV. Uh, he actually loves and enjoys being at the business he creates. So to answer your question, I think a lot of people are like me who want to build it up and one day sell it at its peak, realizing that you can't maintain peak forever. But I think a lot of people, uh, especially if it's very important in their life, they want to keep that business till the day they die, so to speak.
So that's interesting because I think that maybe that's just a paradigm
Yeah.
of for different for different people. So you sold the business, and then what year did you do that? What year did you sell it?
We sold it in 1999.
So that's interesting. So you sell that in 1999. This is right around the time that you get involved with Ingve.
At
Um,
exactly the same time, yeah. As a matter of fact, I think if I can remember the timeline, because now we're going back to ancient history here. Um,
I Oh, come on, it's not
I
that
think,
ancient.
no, I think I had already started managing Ingve. I think I had started, but only for a few months. And then the opportunity
Okay.
to sell came, and my partner and I agreed it was good to go out when we did on top. And the company was a large European corporation, much larger than we were. That was trying to expand in the United States, and we were a perfect fit for them. So
Mhm.
we felt that we were putting our employees in safe hands because the company was so big. I mean, we were like a $9 or $10 million company, and this was like a $400 million company buying us that had been in Great Britain for 100 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
obviously, you worry about yourself and what you can do financially for yourself, having taken the risk of starting the business. But you have a lot of
Yeah.
loyal
Yeah.
employees, and some of them were friends or coworkers with you in the past. You want to try the best to leave them in good hands too. So you always
Hmm.
have that good feeling inside. And they seem like a good, you know, good company to be acquiring us. So that happened about the same time. Uh, so for a while there, I was kind of overextended working again because when we sold, it wasn't just simply you sell and you leave. There was an earnout period of like 2 or 3 years where they said,
Oh.
"Hey, to help in the transition of management, uh, we're buying it. You're getting 80% or so of your purchase price up front, but to get the last 20% plus any chance at a bonus, you need to remain for 3 years side by side with our team to help with the transition of management. You start to fade away as they fade in." And
Oh, wow.
that would play into a conflict with the Ingve management problem because at that time, hopefully there's some fans out there that feel that Ingve's career was in dire straits at that point, and the things we did
Yes.
helped resurrect him some. And at one point, he and his in-laws and his new wife were saying, "Mike, we're really happy with the improvement we're seeing, but we need you to be with us full time." And I told them, I said, "Unfortunately, I can't because my main business and my main earnout period is still contractual obligation with this company that bought mine." So I said, during the day, I'm working with you guys. During my lunch break, Ingve would drive up from Miami to meet me near the office so we could have lunch and do paperwork or discuss ideas or whatever. And then at night, after my wife would go to bed, I'd get back up and I'd be talking to like Pony Canyon Records or whatever in Japan because with 12-hour time difference, trying to negotiate
Yep.
record contracts and stuff for Ingve at night. And so I was stretched a little thin that 2 or 3 years. Um, Eventually, it got to the point where the family was saying, "Mike, we are happy with what you've done for us, but we really would like you to be 100% on the Ingve team." I said, I can't do it." And so it's on good terms, but that's when we separated at that point.
Yeah. So I got to back up a little bit because I know everyone is going to be interested in this part of the story. Is how did you meet him? Like, if you don't mind going back into this, and I
No.
know there's a lot of ground to cover here, but going back into how you met him and um, how it came to be.
Oh, no problem. Hey, I don't mind telling the stories at all. The only thing is, if I ever start getting too detailed or too long-winded, give me a little signal to move on.
Nah, no, it's all good. No,
Um,
it's all good. The reason I'm
uh,
asking is because what you did for Ingve, and I was having this conversation with a very dear friend of mine today at lunch,
okay.
is that you did resurrect his career
Hmm.
because he no one wanted to deal with him, and then you
Right.
step in. But I find it fascinating how you met him, how that the initial interaction happened.
Well, I first met him strictly as a fan, and this was back when Ann Petty used to run his fan club site. When he had the Dragon's Fire newsletter,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like early internet or pre-internet or whatever. And
Yep.
she wanted somebody to help write a column that dealt with technical issues because she didn't know anything about gear. The reality is, I'm probably a better engineer, sound engineer, and mechanical and electrical engineer than I am probably a musician. Uh,
Okay.
you know, on the side, I've also helped design some pedals and amplifiers and guitar designs for some companies. That's on the side, um,
Wow.
But so I was a fan first, and I said, well, and she also needed a database. She was doing all the mailing labels manually. And I said, well, we can use Microsoft Works. That was kind of before Office was as popular. And I can set you up a mailing label database for the newsletters. So I kind of became hired to help with the database for her. And also when questions would come in, the newsletter had a page or a column that was like the gear question, like what type of tubes does Ingve like to use? What kind of string action does he use? And she didn't understand any of that technical stuff. But me, I was familiar with it. And so that's how I started. And then one time she was coming down to Miami, and DOD had just reissued the 250 overdrive pedals in yellow color, I think. I mean, they've reissued them several times. They come out for a couple of years, they would disappear, and they would come out again. But this was in '99, or that's when back in '95. This was 1995, I think I met him. So he, as a matter of fact, it might have been longer than that, because when I first met Ingve, he was still married to Amber.
Amber, okay.
Yeah. So that may be 93, 92, I can't remember. I don't know the time. It's definitely well before 1999, several years before. And we met for his birthday party at a Mexican restaurant, and I handed him the pedal. And I guess he didn't know they'd been reissued. And he really seemed to genuinely appreciate that he got a present that he could relate to,
Oh,
and
wow.
We talked some, and we seemed to hit it off pretty well. Because after that fact, on rare occasion, it was not a regular type of thing. I mean, I'm talking maybe, 3 or 4 times a year. He would invite us down to the house, play ideas for songs, go out to eat at a Mexican or Indian restaurant, and play some pool or whatever. And why we hit that connection off, I don't know. Maybe I was different than the people he was used to dealing with in the music world, personality-wise. So it was kind of a fascination or whatever. And that's really how that maintained itself up until about right around 1999. One day we were having dinner in an Indian restaurant, and he asked me, he says, Mike, you know all this business stuff. Would you mind looking at something for me? I said, sure. And I said, but I don't know the music industry. That's not my world. He's no, it's nothing to do with that. It's money and finances. I said, okay. So he had some paperwork there. And while we were eating, I looked at it, and I said, what do you want me to look at exactly? He says, well, my manager is telling me that we're in trouble. There's no money. He says, I don't understand why. I keep doing these tours. I've got, Pony Canyon Records, but I don't understand. So I started going through, and roughly I basically said, your manager's supposed to get 15%. You're supposed to get 85, right? He says, yep. I said, I got some bad news for you.
Oh no, here we go.
It's the other way around. You're getting the 15%.
Oh, no.
He's getting 85. From what I can see here. From what I can see here, based on this limited paperwork, I said, it just doesn't look right. It doesn't. He said, what should I do? And I said, well, if you don't trust somebody in business, the first thing is break off that connection. But before you do that, let's confirm what I'm saying. Don't take what I'm saying completely at heart, because you've only got a small stack of papers, and I don't know your whole history or whatever. I just say it doesn't look right. But I can find. He said, I said, we need to have an accountant check this over. He says, well, I've already had an accountant look over it. And the accountant said it's fine. I said, who's the accountant? Well, somebody my manager hired. And I said, no, forget that. No. I said, let me get you an accountant that has no connection to the music world. I mean, he works over in banking. He works in like my industry of science and research and technology, and does work for NASA and the cruise ship industry. So he's got no affiliation. And it took that lawyer about a month of going through paperwork, and he came back, and it wasn't quite as bad as what I was saying, but it was bad.
It was bad. Okay.
A lot of money was disappearing. We would find out how much later on, because at that point he said, would you be interested in managing me? And my first response was, I don't know anything about the music industry. Why don't you go? I said, Ingve, I'm a fan of yours, and you're a big name in the guitar world. I'm certain you can get, he said, you can find some managers who know the industry a lot better than I do. He says, I've had this trouble with at least 2 managers who are inside the music industry. I don't know who to trust. I know I can trust you. At least, if nothing else, could you be my manager on an interim until I can find somebody that we can trust?
Okay.
And so I talked over my wife, and it was flattering. Plus the fascination of working in the music industry, and also in my mind, I knew that my time in my company was coming to an end. So I even mentioned to him at the time, if this works out and I'm able to do something good for you, I guess I say goodbye to my lab world. Maybe I will eventually, cross over into being your full-time manager. I just stepped from one world to another. And that was the original idea. And so immediately I came in, and the kind of problems we ran into right off the bat was nobody wanted to talk to me. Like you alluded to a minute ago about nobody wanted to deal with him. But it wasn't Ingve personally. It was they had bad dealings with the manager. But I would have,
this was a management issue.
Yeah, this was, at least what I saw when no one wanted to talk to me. I literally had people when I was trying to get touring groups talking about putting Ingve on a tour to promote. At that time, his newest album, War to End All Wars, was just coming out. He had already recorded it. I think the very first thing I did for him, other than find the attorney or the accountant, was he had just finished recording War to End All Wars. So I know some people comment on the sound quality of that, but that was a period of turmoil and limited finances for him when he did that. And Pony Canyon was expecting it in 16 days. And he says, I'm supposed to deliver artwork too. And he says, Lewis used to always take care of that for me. What can we do? And we were sitting there talking about what he wanted to do on the record cover. And I said, would you trust doing something different? He goes, what do you mean? And I said, every one of your album covers has always featured you on the cover or your face on the cover.
Face. Right.
And there's nothing certainly wrong with that because you are the main act, but they don't all have to be that way. Could we try something different? And he says, well, what can we try? And I said, well, why don't we try to get a noted artist to do some original artwork for you, because that in itself brings its own notoriety, because we're crossing over. You may have people that don't even know you personally in your music, but they may be fans of that famous artist, and that might lure them in. Here again, I was starting to try to think outside the box, partially for 2 reasons. One, it's what worked in my own business, was doing things that were not traditional in that industry, plus stepping into the music industry. I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest with you. So I would try anything that I thought would work. Well, with 16 days to go, there was no artist that we had enough budget for to do an original work. So I got in touch with the son of Frank Frazetta, who, of course, I always like him from the Conan the Barbarian and all his classic assignments. And he sent over a catalog of work that they would license for limited use. And I put him out on the table and I said, do you like anything here? And Ingve saw the Death Dealer artwork by Frank Frazetta with the fighting barbarians. And he says, hey, my album's called War to End All Wars. I got a battle scene here. Let's do it.
Wow, that's so great to finally put that album cover into context.
Yeah.
Because I remember thinking that every album cover had, with the exception of Rising Force with the duck in the flames, every album cover had Ingve on the cover. Mm-hmm. And here comes War to End All Wars, and there's this whole different thing. And now it's great to hear it.
Kind of thing or whatever.
Yeah. It was like a Boris.
But again, it was the idea of trying something different.
Yeah.
And the other problem we ran into there was time and budget again. I wasn't particularly fond of the mix.
Oh yeah, that mix is hard. Yeah.
But at that point, it was already in the can, so to speak. Time was clicking. We had a few days left, and all we had was the cover. So then we had to do interior art and stuff. And it was kind of odd the way Ingve's contract was with Pony Canyon, because at that point, that's the only label we really had. There was no at
Right.
that point. He'd already lost the U.S. label. There was no European label. If you were an Yngwie fan, you had to buy the Pony Canyon Japanese imports. So that's why I said it was a low
Correct.
point in the career. So the way it worked was with Pony Canyon, they pretty much did what he wanted. So he would send the master over and send over the artwork he wanted with a description of how he wanted it used, and that's what they would do. And he says, well, I want to be in a suit of armor holding a sword. And he has a suit of armor, if people see interviews, he has suits of armor in his house, but they really are not
Yes.
wearable. They're not wearable. They're just posable, and they're not even, I think they're probably not even to scale. I mean, they're probably 75% human scale, or at least they were scaled for a very small person. I mean, I know
Okay.
I wouldn't have fitted to them. So he couldn't wear that. And so we started calling around to see if there was a wardrobe company or whatever, because there were some television shows like The Glades and some other TV shows, and the first
Yeah.
2 seasons of Dexter. I thought, well, maybe but there was nobody in South Florida that had that kind of costuming. I'm sure if we were out in Hollywood, California, we could have found something, from a costume shop. So
Okay.
the guy at Spitfire Records, because as this was all going on at the same time, I had been able to negotiate a new U.S. record label with Spitfire
Yeah,
Records.
and I want you to continue on on this
Okay.
subject, but that was your deal, right? You got him with
Yeah.
Spitfire.
Yeah, Spitfire I did.
I just want to put that into
Sure.
the context of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I have to admit, if it seems like we try to get, I mean, it's fortunate we got a lot of things working, and but it was almost you needed to, because the situation that had been left with financially and professionally with the past management problems, it was kind of dire straits. I mean, you don't advertise this to the public, but it was like all of a sudden there were tax bills for unpaid taxes on the house going back 3 years that would show up.
Oh
That
wow!
anybody never knew about, because that was what the manager was supposed to take care of, but he just didn't let anybody
Right.
see the mail. He was,
Yeah.
It's like these things were building up, but the manager wouldn't let you know about it. He would just keep taking, and so we had to get, labels back. We had to get brand recognition back, name recognition, and do a lot of stuff at once. So I was trying a lot of different ideas, but so basically the artist Rich DeSilvia at Spitfire Records ended up doing the artwork, where he just used animation to create a suit of armor and a sword.
That's
And
what I felt
the
that was yeah.
And the rest of the interior artwork. And then once Spitfire got done with it, with about 2 days to spare, we FedExed everything over to Pony Canyon to meet their deadline. Because I think the way that contract was originally drafted, there was a penalty for missing delivery dates.
Wow.
Yeah. And it gets a little worse than that. I mean, this is another little, I don't know if this has ever come out before, but one of the things we ran into was right after that happened, the guys at Pony Canyon said, well, great, we've got this new War to End All Wars album. When do we get the free album? And I said, what do you mean a free album? And he said, well, look through the paperwork. And sure enough, the past management had promised a free album based on past financial advances.
Holy shit.
And yeah.
Now, okay, let me ask you this, since we're there. And I think this is going to be very, very beneficial from an educational standpoint. A free album. That's not just an artist going into the studio and recording maybe 10 leftover songs that they might have had, or some lost tapes that they found in their vault. But it's also the publishing, right? It's everything. Is that am I correct in that?
No, basically it was a full-fledged album, like any major release, like a Fire and Ice or anything.
Right.
But apparently money had been advanced when needed by the management.
Oh.
So that basically, maybe I shouldn't call it a free album. Maybe it was a prepaid album or a return on a loan type thing.
Yeah, so basically,
anybody had no knowledge. Anybody's sitting here with no money,
right?
The label expecting it for. Wait, he says, wait a minute, I didn't get any money from this so-called album, and yet I'm supposed to do it for free. which to him, it effectively would have been free.
So this management.
We did get out of it, though. We got out of it.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. When they realized the situation Ingve had been in, and they expressed some concerns that they had or conflicts with the past management, and they seemed to appreciate a fresh face, they ended up dropping and waiving that and not pushing it.
Oh, thank God. So basically, the management was using that label as like an ATM, you know.
It appears that way.
And
I'm always hesitant. I'm always hesitant to be 100% definitive with some of this stuff because it was all very hazy. It was hard to find copies of documentation because Ingve didn't have it. He probably made the mistake a lot of musicians have made in the past. I would hope fewer make it today because they've learned from the problems of others have had. But they don't want to be bothered with the boring aspects of business. They simply want to create and live the life. So they hire a manager and says, hey, you pay my bills. You take care of all this mumbo jumbo and taxes. You just give me what's mine to play with. And that's outside the music world or other entertainment industries. I think most people in everyday life that don't work in that world would never dream of trusting their entire financial stability to somebody else. But we hear that story quite often in the past with musicians and some actors and creative minds. And I mean, one of the things I did do with him is when I took over, I said, I don't want you to ever have to think that you have to trust me. He said, I do trust you. And I said, you shouldn't. And it says nothing about me. Yeah, it says nothing about me, but I have a motto in life and in business, and that is don't trust anybody except yourself, and then not even 100%, because we've all at times done things that we ourselves don't know why we did them.
Wow.
So I told him, I said, here's what we're going to do different. When a check comes in from Pony Canyon, you're going to sign it, you're going to cash it. And when we go to the bank, you will see that you're getting 85%, and you turn right around and you write me mine for 15%. That's totally opposite of the way we used to operate, where it was like the manager had it all and you just trusted he was giving you. So no, you'll see it, you're going to sign it, you got to copy it, I have a photocopy of it, and we go to the bank, and it's, whatever it is, $100,000, 85,000 of it's yours, 15,000 of it's mine. And you know how things are.
Right. Yeah.
And that was a first. Yeah. That had never been, in his life before.
So were you the one that sent him out on that press junket? It was right around that time because, you're absolutely right. I know that promoters didn't, and you're right, it was management, but Ingve was getting the brunt of this, where the promoters didn't want to deal with him and all of that stuff. But I remember a press junket, and it was under the Spitfire thing, and I remember him going on the Eddie Trunk show and all these shows. But that was
that was all part of the Spitfire deal. Spitfire did two things. They paid for the new War to End All Wars, made a big deal of saying that Ingve's back on a U.S. label. And of course, it wasn't a super big label, but at that time you had Dio was on it, Zakk Wylde was on it.
Yep.
So I mean, it's a respectable label, but it's also a big transition time. It's a transition time in the music industry. I mean, that's when Napster was just coming on the scene, and it was the dawn of the new MP3 download era, and record sales not being able to hit the numbers they had, in the 80s. So that was. I consider that time period that I was the tail end of traditional music business, because at the time I saw Napster coming out. As a matter of fact, I remember a friend back then sending me a link to a Russian website where it showed that War to End All Wars had been downloaded like 12,000 times, the full album, a week before it officially was released.
Oh my God. Really?
So that was the early days of Napster and all the MP3 stuff. You could see the future. The writing was on the wall. Although a lot of the record labels back then didn't believe it. They still thought well, this is going to give us free exposure and free advertising that we never had before. This internet, it's a great thing. And I said, that's not what's going to happen. You'll get the free exposure, but these people are going to get the music for free. No, we're not worried about that. People have always been able to rip off music. You go to a friend's house, you make a cassette copy for yourself. I said, that's different. How many people can use that cassette copy? 1, 2? What I'm telling you is, with the internet now, of course, we take it for granted today, but put yourself back in 1999 internet mentality. I was warning them back then. I said, hey, I'm new to your industry, but I'm just going to tell you, knowing what human nature is, I said, this will not literally happen, but technologically it could. Metallica's got a new album coming out next week. I get on the internet and tell everybody, don't buy it. I'm going to buy it and rip it and throw it up on the internet as an MP3 and feel free to download it for free. And that next Metallica album will sell 1 copy. The 1 copy I buy and load up to the internet. I said, now that extreme would not happen in reality, but it's symbolic of what technologically could happen. And of course, as fast forward to today, and we see what's transpired.
Well, yeah. I mean, most, if not all, brick and mortar record stores are gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, artists, including myself, I do it myself. When I release my records, I put them on my YouTube channel. Now, and I don't know whether it's just the way people consume music today. Whether they listen to it the way we grew up listening to it. And of what I speak.
Right.
We used to get the record. We would sit down and it would be an experience. The new record comes out. We're listening to this. We would listen to it from front to back. I remember the Odyssey album.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the release date, and I was at the record store at 9 a.m. Bought my copy and I brought it home, and I listened to that record from front to back, like non-interrupted. It was, and I sat and I experienced that record. So I don't know whether that with what you were just saying about how it's so easily accessible, and the habits of listening to music today.
Yeah.
Well, I remember, because growing up here in Philadelphia, and hanging out with all these jazz guys, we would talk about this and how jazz became wallpaper, how it became lounge music. Well, that's what's happened to rock music.
Right.
I don't think it was just because it was jazz. I think it was just the times,
Right.
And I remember going to see one of my great teachers, the guy who taught me to read music, and he was a lounge act. He's doing his lounge thing, and he's just killing it, playing over all these great pieces of music, playing the changes and stuff like that. But it was at a hotel, and this rock band, I don't forget who they were, but they were a famous rock band, was staying at the hotel, and they came into the lounge, and even these guys were sitting there going, I can't believe that we're even considered musicians after hearing this guy play, and it's just an interesting turn of how music is consumed. I found it interesting.
Well, it's a combination of factors. It's a combination of factors. I mean, one is the technology let people get it cheap or free. Right. That has a couple of ramifications. It doesn't have as much value, doesn't mean as much, but it also affected the industry as a whole financially. Then, of course, we have the advent of streaming TV, streaming movie. I mean, I always think it's amazing. If you really stop and think about it, you have something like a little drive like this.
Mm-hmm.
Most people use these every day, but don't really understand how the technology can do what it does, where you put 5,000 songs and maybe 100 movies as MP3s and MP4s on this. That's almost unfathomable that you can have that many transistors this small. And even I know the theory of it, but I still can't visualize how it works, you know.
Mhm.
But we have a limitless amount of entertainment today. Limitless. I mean, my wife and I, are trying to make lists of TV shows or movies that might interest us. The problem is we probably watch more TV and stuff than we should, you know, but the list keeps growing faster than we can get through it, because it seems like every other day there's a new TV series, every other day there's a movie. So that's cheapened it to a certain extent. And, like you said a minute ago, it used to be that music was an activity or an entertainment form in itself. Like you said, I remember the days of,
Yeah.
you bring home a Led Zeppelin album, you go to a friend's house because he was the first to get it. You go down in the basement, and everybody would be trading the album cover artwork and looking at it, and you listen to the whole album as a group, and that was an evening. Now
Yeah,
I've
and then
seen
there would be times where they would, we'd get done a tune, or
yeah,
roll that needle back. What was that?
yeah,
Like it was this organic conversation that was happening. So
and it
go ahead.
was a form of entertainment in itself. I have seen interviews and polls online, and where they basically interview younger people today, and they ask them about the importance of music, and the end result is basically they say, in the past, music was a primary form of entertainment. Now, for many, music is something that plays in the background while you're doing something else.
Exactly.
Whether it's a
Meaning that
game, whether it's watching TikTok or something, it's playing in the background just to have some noise back there. But I'm not really focused on it. It's like you said, wallpaper, or it's background noise.
wallpaper, right?
And that's
But
that's
even
a
on
social.
TikTok, even TikTok though, a lot of songs
Yeah.
that were lost in the ether
Mm-hmm.
through TikTok have become popular again, because it becomes this point of reference, to
Yeah.
whatever the subject matter is in the TikTok thing. So I haven't completely given up hope,
No.
but I will say that, I mean, some years back when I was at rock school, I remember some of my students put together a club, and it was called the Vinyl Club. And they used to come and ask me, so you talked about this listening thing. And I said, yeah. I said, call it a listening party. And they're like, well, what does that mean? I was like, go out, get yourself a record, or whatever. I don't care what the medium in which you're
Right.
using to listen to it, but listen to it collectively, and don't talk over it. Don't brush your hair or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, and then discuss the song. So they started this club, and it was called the Vinyl Club. And it was like, I think it was like one Saturday. I don't know when it was, but they would come in on Monday to the school, and they would talk about these songs, and these songs became imprints to them. And just like I would do with students to this day, and I do this to this day, is I give them listening homework, not just stuff to play, but listen to this. But what I say to them is, when you come in next week, I want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't listen to this and say, oh, well, my guitar teacher assigned this song for me to listen to, so I better find something nice to say about it. So I say to them, I want to hear what you don't like about it as
Mm-hmm.
much as I want to hear what you like about it. I learned so much, with these students coming back in and saying, you know, how they were reacting to things. Like, man, I didn't like this part. This part really didn't work for me, or this part was, really like this. I had one kid come in and he was like, oh, all of a sudden everything got really dirty. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, the guitar sound got really, I was like, distortion. So I got to the point where I could talk to a student about reacting to sonics. Like, I remember growing up when I was a kid, and my father was a big jazz guy. He used to listen to a lot of jazz. And my initial hearing of jazz was depressing because the way they would do that thing on the cymbal,
Mm-hmm.
it always sounded like it was raining.
Yeah.
And I said that to my dad. I said, why does all the recordings sound like it's raining? I was so young, I couldn't understand it. It was like the first time I heard Alan Holdsworth.
Mm-hmm.
The very first time I heard Alan Holdsworth, I turned it off.
Right.
I wasn't ready,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But then later, so the interaction that I find with students and musicians is turning them on to music as homework and then getting them to actually have to listen to it because they basically have to come back with a report. But the report is completely subjective. It's like, how did that make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
And I have found really great results from it in the sense that I'm seeing students now listening to music actively, like an active participate participatory sport. Like I have to listen to this. So even listening becomes an art form. Like
Well, I think that's an important point because a lot of people don't hear anymore because they're dividing their attention among several things. I mean, maybe I'm too linear in my thought, but I like to really focus on what I'm doing. And we ourselves don't have children, but if you're visiting somebody and you'll say the TV's on, stereo's playing, they're doing a video game, and they're texting at the same time. I go, are you doing? It's like, to me, that's too much sensory input. But how much attention are you really paying to any of it?
well, that's the
You
thing.
do
You
all
said
four at the same time.
so. You're saying sensory input, but all of those inputs are limited because
Yeah,
it's fragmented. It's fragmented
right.
input. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that the idea of pure concentration to one thing at that moment
mm-hmm.
um, went from something that was natural to something that now has to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
You know, find it fascinating. It just
Yeah,
you know, and even the older I get, when I'm working on what I'm working on, I find myself in that same position. I'll be working on something here in the studio, and maybe I'm working on a track, maybe I'm working on an educational thing, and I'm like, oh wait a minute, I got to return an email. you know,
yeah,
it's funny because you know, 20, 25, 30 years ago, when we were in the studio and we got there to record, and we had forgotten to tell somebody that this or that or the other thing. Tough shit. Sorry, I'm here now. But now it's like and I'm not going to say that being connected is a bad thing. I think it's a great thing. But um, being connected in that way delineates the power of the very one thing that you're doing.
right.
So, you know, if you're doing this one thing, it's great to say, oh, well, that's okay. I can multitask. Great. But one of those tasks is going to suffer for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it
You
might be the
never
most
get
important
after
task. Yeah.
it. Yeah. And it does require a bit more discipline because there is so many things that can distract you today. Like you just mentioned, answering an email or a cell phone.
Yeah.
Maybe it is important that you answer that because of the new expectation for communication. Whereas, let's say if we took you back to the early 70s, even with your own parents, you'd leave the house at 9 in the morning. They had no idea where you were. You
Right.
wouldn't speak with them all day. All they knew is by the time the street lights come on, it starts getting dark. You should be home for dinner. That's almost unfathomable to people now. People now hear that and go, "Why were parents so neglectful back then?" And how did you know your kid wasn't going to be abducted? But that wasn't even a mentality back then.
Right.
And I'll be honest, it is sometimes surprising. I mean, I catch myself sometimes thinking, oh, I'm getting ready to go on a 1,000-mile road trip in the car. Let's see, got to make sure I have my cell phone charger in case the car breaks down. I'm thinking,
Yep.
wait a minute, 40 years ago, if I get in a car to drive from Virginia to Florida, I didn't have a cell phone. Did I ever worry about it then? No. And when
It's
the one
really
time
funny.
the car did break down, I had to walk 3 miles to the next exit to get, to let them know that I had a problem. So it's funny, you change your expectation level as the technology changes. But now I think
What?
I would never let a full afternoon go without calling my wife at work like twice and checking on her. If you think about it, years ago, no, you went to work in the morning, you never saw that person until 6 o'clock at night, and you never spoke with them.
Yep.
Uh, but
Yeah.
now the
No.
problem is we've made a new expectation level that if you don't communicate normally, well, you're being rude. So you almost have to be more involved because it's the new
Or
communication level.
yeah, even further beyond that, it's almost an emergency.
Yeah,
I haven't heard from so and so in 4 hours. It was wrong
yeah,
because it
yeah,
became a new normal, right?
yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. We would disappear for
Mhm.
hours on end and come back, and it was just a normal thing. It's like, okay, we're back. I remember coming back from. I did a show with Joe Lynn Turner. And we were coming back from New York City, uh, and I was on a timeline myself because I wanted to get home before the liquor store closes because I'm that guy. And meanwhile, everyone's in the car on their cell phones, looking at the maps, like, oh, the what do you call it, the maps that you look at, the
Matt, yeah,
navigators.
yeah,
I'm reading the street signs. I'm reading the signs on the highway. I know where I'm going because I'm that guy. I'm
yeah,
like, well, number one, we're heading south. That much I know. And, I know what the New Jersey Turnpike is, which is following the signs. Meanwhile, I've got four people in the car arguing with their phones, telling me to get off this exit, get off that exit. I was like, shut your phones off. You know, Old school, baby. I'm getting us home the real way. You know what I mean? It's like, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that technology because I drive to Florida quite regularly, as you
yeah,
may know, and I don't use. I mean, I know my route. I don't need this, but I will look at it because if there's a crazy traffic jam or something happen, it'll reroute me. That's the beautiful thing about technology to me is that it can save me time. But I never want to lose the ability to use my own sense of self to know
mhm,
what that street sign means.
yeah,
And when you have a generation of people who are sitting there staring at their phone in their car instead of looking at the road and having that ability to, getting going all the way back to the way
right.
you were trained as a scuba diver,
Mhm,
you could be in the most insane shit show that can be imagined, but you're like, oh, I was trained for this. I got this.
right.
I know what to do. So, so uh, the Ingve thing. One of the other things I want to talk to you about tonight is I really want to talk about your book and your fitness regimen and how that started. Was that something that started really young for you, or
Yeah,
was that something?
yeah. I say young. For people my age, it was very common to get interested in that in the teen years because that's about the time the movie Pumping Iron came out that introduced
Okay.
Arnold Schwarzenegger to the world. Lou Ferrigno was on TV as the Incredible Hulk, and Joe Weider was the big name in protein powders and muscle mags. And so I mean, it started earlier. I mean, I'm sure people in the 50s with Steve Reeves playing Hercules, a lot of kids were equally motivated. But it seems like the mid 70s is when the whole weightlifting phenomenon became more widely popular. And everybody credits Arnold, Lou Ferrigno, and movie Pumping Iron as really making, the weightlifting and all that cool. So that's when I got interested in it originally.
Okay. And what prompted the book?
The honest truth is, I was telling you about the long hours it took to start the company, and how much of a struggle it was in the early days, where we were there, 16, 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to keep the doors open for the first 2 years before the company was successful. Then you have to start taking clients out for lunch, take clients out for breakfast, take clients out for dinner. And basically, I ballooned up in weight, got out of shape, wasn't feeling very good. And so one of the first things I told myself when we sold the business was, if I want to live long enough to enjoy some of the money we made selling the company, I better start living different.
Oh,
And
wow.
so the truth is I never lost interest in it, but I just could never find time to be consistent with it when you're working those kind of, entrepreneurial business hours. So once we sold the business, I simply got back into it. Now, that went on for a couple of years. And my wife and I had a gym membership at the fitness center at the hospital where she works, because they gave that as a perk to employees and their families. And by then I was getting in fairly, better shape again. And a lot of people would come up to me. And of course, at that time I was 50. I was 50 then. And people would come up to me and say, "Hey, I didn't know you were 50, Mike. What do you do?" And so I would.
I'm having a hard time believing. I'm having a hard time right now believing you're 60.
Thank you. But they would tell me stories like, I've been paying, X amount of dollars for a trainer, and I've had this trainer for a year, and I don't see any difference. And so I'd give them some tips, and they'd come back a couple months later and say, "Man, the advice you gave me really worked. It was more helpful than what I was paying for. You need to write a book." And the first thing I said was, "Well, we're in the internet generation now. The last thing the world needs is another book about health and fitness." But thank you. But seriously, but thank you for the nice compliment. But I don't think a book would be, that big of a deal. But it kept happening. And I mean, it really did keep happening. I mean, maybe 20 or 30 different people at different times would ask me for tips and say, "Hey, I'm only 38. You're 50, sir. Boy, can you help me out?" And so finally, after about 30 people said, "You need to write a book," I said to my wife, I said, maybe there is a market for it, because most of the books out in the world out there are more focused towards hardcore bodybuilding or something like that. There wasn't, when I looked, at least, there wasn't a lot dedicated to people over the age of 40. So I sat down, spent 18 months working with people, about 200 different people at the hospital there at the fitness center. And, based on my personal knowledge and the science knowledge I knew, I went ahead and wrote the book. And for a brief time, I'll be honest, I thought to myself, well, maybe this will be the launching pad for a mail order business. I envisioned originally at that time thinking, well, the book will be, if it's popular, I could expand that into a line of nutritional supplements and maybe something else. I have to say right now, as a financial endeavor or as whatever, the book did not become a big like New York Times bestseller. It won some awards. It was an award-winning book, and it sold several thousand copies, but it was never like a big phenomenon. And I think it's timing. I've had a lot of people say, if you had written that book 20 years later before the internet was big, the book would have probably done more. But now you can almost go to YouTube and get anything you want for free. So a book is not the way to launch a company in today's world.
I see what you mean.
And but it was still,
but it's still an amazing book, and I'm going to put that link. I'm putting the link in the description. This fitness.
Thank you. And the award, winning the awards meant something, that it was recognizing how you value. And I still get emails and whatever, people either writing questions or thanking me for how it helped them. So it was rewarding in that way, but it didn't it didn't do the business type potential that I thought it might there at one point.
I gotcha. Okay. Well, it helped me. I mean, I lost 120 pounds reading that book. So
All right.
not from reading it, but from applying it. I want to make
Okay.
that clear. Um, so thank you for that. So you put that book out. You got the book. So there's so many things that you did, right? And
Mhm.
but you're still making music because I played on one of your recent tracks. You're still making
Yeah.
music, man. You're still doing it. So I think it's a beautiful thing. And I'm gonna get into this last subject here. Is one of the conversations that we had the other night, which is, and you alluded to it earlier in this interview, which I think was great, is the paths that you choose, and then the retrospective of looking
Mhm.
back and saying, was that was that the right path? You know.
Yeah.
And
Well, no, go ahead, sir.
my takeaway is that your path was an amazing path because not only did you continue to create the music, but you got to you brought great positivity to got to people like Ingve. You actually resurrected that dude's career. That, that's it. Like that. That's objectively speaking. Like you resurrected his career. You created a business that actually benefited the health of an entire state. You know,
Mhm.
and but you still create music. So I mean, um, my takeaway from our one conversation about that is that you did the right thing, Michael. You did the right thing.
Okay.
You
All right.
know,
Well, that means something. You say that, but
you
that
know,
might lead into something. This might lead into something where I don't know, maybe some pearls of wisdom from a guy now, turning 60 and having the opportunity to look back at life a little bit.
yeah,
There might be something in this next little conversation we have that might be useful to people. Uh, you'd mentioned doing different things. I will confess, I do. I am at a point now where I do look back at life and ask the question, "What if?" Now, I don't spend a lot of time on it. I don't want to give that impression because it does no good. You're wasting your time. There's nothing you can do about it. But
okay.
I always think it's interesting how my father has a quote. My father has a quote I always like. He says, "Every decision you've made in your entire life has brought you to where you are right now." You know, and that goes right in line with something I've always said was, your life is made up with an infinite number of left and right turns. You're going down a road and you have a choice to make. Do I go to the left? Do I go to the right? No matter which one you choose, you will never see what was on the road you didn't take.
Right. Okay.
I've
Yeah.
often said it'd be
Wow.
neat. I don't know if people could deal with it. It would be neat if somehow there was a way that, you know, you could see what your life would be in any other different, just like an option. Let me see option one. Let me see option two. You can't do it. You can't change anything. It would just be showing you what it would be. I sometimes think people wouldn't be able to handle that because they'd either be very
No,
jubilant
I
or very
agree with you.
depressed.
I agree with you. I agree
It's
with
like,
you. I
oh
don't
my
think
God,
you.
Um, but one of the things I sometimes question myself with, you were asking about how I got interested in guitar. And I told you I first got interested when I was 10, but didn't stick with it. And then again when I was 12 and didn't stick with it. And 15, didn't stick with it. Because why? I was off here scuba diving, or I was riding 10-speed bikes up and down the East Coast, or I was looking for Civil War relics on a museum or whatever, or I was in the gym trying to lift weights, or whatever. It's like, I know so many people who say they're bored all the time because they can't find something to do. It's like the guy I told you about, the business guy who asked me, Mike, isn't retirement driving you crazy? I, what I said, between cleaning the house, taking my wife craft shopping, us spending time together, me trying to squeeze in time for guitar, go to the gym, I also am in antique cars. I've got my old dream car. It was a 1973 Porsche 911 Targa.
Oh my God! Yeah, I love that car.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Well, the story there, this funny story on that one is I had the Matchbox version of that car when I was young.
Okay.
So I had it when I was 9 or 10 years old.
Okay.
It didn't really mean anything to me that it was a Porsche. That didn't mean anything to a 9-year-old kid. I just thought that was my favorite toy car because it was cool looking. And I remember telling myself back then.
And it was yellow.
And it was yellow. It was that car with the Fuchs wheels, a Targa. It was that car. And I said, when I grow up, I'm going to have this. Now, a couple of flaws there in the logic. When you're 9 years old, A, you don't know what they cost. And B, by the time you grow up, that would already be getting to be an older car by then.
But Michael, here's the thing. But it's the universe. You envisioned it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in this stuff. I'm a big believer in that. Yeah. So go ahead.
I'll get back to the main story we were on, but this is another one that might make you laugh before we get back to the cerebral, retrospective stuff. But one day after we'd sold the company, my wife and I were visiting her family in Waynesboro, Virginia. And we're driving down the road, and all of a sudden something catches the corner of my eye, and big U-turn in the middle of the road. And my wife's yelling at me like, what the hell are you doing? She thought I was going to hit a dog or something. And I said, you didn't see that back there? That's a 1973 and a half 911 Targa T. And she goes, what? And I said, that's it. That's the car that I had as a kid. It's the same year. It's the same color. It's got the same wheels. It's the Targa top. That is it. That's the car I swore I would always have. So we pulled up to the place and asked them about it. And they say it had just been brought in the day before by a doctor who had it in his barn for a couple of years and got bored with it.
Wow.
It might need some work. I said, so you're going to sell it? And he says, well, yeah. So I got out and looked at it, and I could see we had some rust. It was going to need some work. And, my wife could see I was, interested in it. She says, we just sold the company. We probably shouldn't be getting carried away spending money. And I thought, but she's right. I mean, because you can easily get, sloppy and careless with your spending. So we were sitting at her family's house that night watching movies, and she could see me over there just.
Oh, it's in your head. Yeah.
And she says, well, it needs some work. Do you think it'll be that expensive? And I said, well, define that, but no, it's not the most expensive model. There are more powerful models that year, but it doesn't matter. That's the one I had as a kid. And so the evening went on. It was a Clint Eastwood marathon. And I said, oh, man, this is my favorite, High Plains Drifter. And she says, no, it's not. It's Pale Rider. I said, no, this is High Plains Drifter. She says, no, it's Pale Rider. And I said, Sweet Pea, who do you think knows more about Clint Eastwood, you or me? She says, I love Clint Eastwood. And I said, I know, but I'm telling you, this is High Plains Drifter. It's my single favorite Clint Eastwood movie. She says, no, it's not. It's Pale Rider. She says, do you want to bet me? I said, no, you don't want to bet me.
Here we go. I know where this is going.
I am not a gambling man. I don't bet unless I know I'm right. I don't gamble. She says, well, you're wrong this time. And I said, all right, what's the bet? She says, if you're right, you can go down tomorrow morning and buy that. And I said, vice versa, if she's right, then I have to buy something costly for her. So, back then there was the commercial breaks, and now we returned with Clint Eastwood in High Plains Drifter. And she's like, oh, shit. So the next day I went down and bought it. And
I've seen some of your posts with you, cruising in it. And, oh, man, I can hear the tactile engine humming, man. That's amazing. So how much work did you put into it?
Well, honestly, it's had extensive work because it needed some engine work at first. It needed some body rust repair. But the worst case is this was a transitional year. That's why they call it the 73 and a half Targa. It was the first year that Bosch did a fuel injection, moving from carburetors.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, there's two reasons that car is rare, or that particular version. It was only made for half a year as they were transitioning, and half of them caught fire. And mine was one because there's, some design flaws in the early fuel injection, which you can correct with aftermarket stuff since then. But at the time,
Yeah.
And unfortunately for me, after I owned it for about 12 years, I got in it one day, turned the ignition, heard a massive explosion, and had fire shooting behind me.
I remember you were telling me about this.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
luckily, I had 3 fire extinguishers in the car, and that wasn't stopping the fire. And I was near a gas station. I ran into their store, and I said, "I'll pay you later, but I need your fire extinguishers." And I just tore them off the wall and ran out into the parking lot.
Holy shit.
And I almost had it under control, and it started to pop up again, burning. But a police officer pulled up. He had 2 fire extinguishers. He started helping me, and we just kept it contained. Oh, we couldn't get it to stop, but we kept it contained to the rear engine compartment, and then the fire department showed up. Long story short, it was off the road for 3 years, getting rebuilt.
Oh my God.
And but anyway, that's that story. About retrospective. Yeah. We were talking about people having too many hobbies. That's how we got on this thing about I spend time working on that too. So I know so many people that say, well, I'm bored. I can't find anything to do and whatever. And I'm like, man, I wish I had that problem. I have the exact opposite problem. And this will play back to the wisdom we're talking about. I have so many different interests that it seems like I have to jump from one to another and really schedule my time. Like I almost have to in my head say, okay, I need to go tune up the 911 today. Then I have a lot of yard work to do because I do most of the yard work at our own house. I say, okay, then I have to, do whatever. All right. And I've got 2 hours now of free time. So let me get in some guitar practice before I do my trip to the gym because I enjoy all these things. But it seems like I have to be very careful allotting time to all of them to fit them all in. And that plays back to what I was saying is you were talking about the music. I do it because I like it. But there have been times that in the past where I have thought of selling everything and just stopping. And one of the reasons is I realize how hard it is to find time to put the amount of time into it I feel I would need to be as good as I'd like to be. Even after all these years of playing, I still qualify myself as a mediocre or average player, meaning my skill level is probably more on par with a Tony Iommi Iron Maiden genre of music. But that's another reason I play is because it's the one thing that doesn't come natural to me. Writing a book came natural to me. Managing a company was not difficult. I mean, it's hard work, but as far as, some people say they have a natural knack for something, and I know what they mean. And having worked with so many different professionals in different areas, I see what they mean. I see the people, like one of my best friends who's a guitar player, he's the antithesis of me. I never, except for some blues or something, I suck at improvising. I always have to, I write all the solos I've ever done on a song based on what I hear. I say, I want to do. Then I work it out and I write it and rehearse it.
Okay.
That's the way my brain works. But I know the music theories. This friend of mine, he can't explain how he does it. He can't tell you that an A minor chord is made up of an A, C, and E note. He can't do it. He doesn't know any theory. If I ask him to play a scale, he can't play a scale.
Right.
But he can hear a song one time and play it with 90% accuracy. But I asked him, how do you do that? His answer is, I don't know. I've just always been able to. Now, these are two extremes where I'm the exact opposite. The book that I wrote, for example, it was the first book. I've written standard operating procedures and testing procedures for chemistry over the years. That was the first full-length book I wrote. The editor, when they got it, asked me how many rewrites it had, and I said none. That's just the way I wrote it, from the first word to the end.
Right.
She says, you didn't rewrite it? I said, no. The 400 pages wrote it. She says, how did you do that? And I said, I know the subject matter. It just happened.
Yes.
I wish I had that. I wish I had that ability musically. I don't. Music is a struggle for me. I know the science and the mathematics and the technical, but the motor skills, because I also dealt with some focal dystonia in the past, but I really have to work at it and practice, which may be also conversely the reason I haven't given up on it, because now there's a personal challenge. I can say I'm never going to be as good as I'd like to have been, or I should be for all the years I've done. But unlike business, unlike writing, unlike leadership positions I've had, where they seem to be my second nature and come easy, this is something that doesn't come easy. So now it's a challenge to try to be better at it. But I'll be honest, there are times where I think how much time I could spend on something else, because the logic part of my brain does sometimes say, hey, you're not doing this for a living. There are a million people in the world who are much more talented musically than you. And if you talk about the song we did together, and we've done two together, I said, if Mike Spitzer never writes and collaborates with another song, the world is not going to miss it or care. So why am I doing this? There are times when I do catch myself, but now being an older person, I say, well, sometimes you don't always have to be doing something for financial gain, business gain, notoriety. Sometimes you're just doing it for yourself.
I think it's important.
Even if it's as simple as now being older and realizing that things like music and mechanical skills is just a good exercise to prevent the brain from getting Alzheimer's or whatever. It's got a different meaning. But
no, I think it's very important. I think it's important to create for the sake of creation, and for multiple reasons. Multiple reasons, and one of them speaks to that what you just said, which is keeping the synapses firing. It's good, right? And in the industry, in the music industry,
right?
No one's
professionally, there are times. Yeah, go ahead.
No one's making any money, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing that I've always felt about creating, if I'm going to go into that world of, for my case, egocentricity, it's my legacy, because it's going to outlive me. It's going to be around after I'm gone. Like Vivaldi's music wasn't discovered until hundreds of years after his passing.
Yeah.
The Four Seasons, which is like,
yeah,
everyone knows the Four Seasons. He was long gone before anyone discovered it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But he's immortal. He's immortal now.
Yeah.
So
the way this ties into professional, we started off this conversation talking about what ifs. As I sit here at 60 years old now, wondering where the last 20 years went so quickly, probably my biggest single what if, and here again, I want to qualify by saying you can't dwell on this stuff too long, but sometimes it is interesting.
Right.
Because I've had so many interests. I've had a mild or moderate of success with each of them. But what if, and this is one question I'll never know the answer to, but I do ask myself, if I had focused all my energy and attention and time into just one endeavor, might I have accomplished more in that one endeavor? Because like we were talking about, if I can just run down what we were talking about tonight. Yes, I had a company that we co-founded, and it was successful. But it certainly wasn't a Amazon or a Microsoft or an Elon Musk Tesla. It was a small company. Yes, I wrote a book. It won awards, but it most certainly didn't win the New York Times bestseller or whatever. I managed Yngwie. I helped his career as one of influential guitarists, but it's not as though I was Rick Rubin or a famous record industry executive. So I guess what I'm saying is I had a moderate amount of success, in my own fitness world. I won some fitness contests, got some product endorsements. I was featured in some magazines when I was in my peak shape in my early 40s. But that doesn't mean I was Arnold Schwarzenegger on a Mr. Olympia stage either. So I guess what I'm saying is I divided my attention and energies up over 5 or 6 areas. And I was blessed and grateful to have some small level of success at each. But what if I'd have done like a Van Halen does, or a Bill Gates does, where you put all your energy into one thing from the day you're young? Might you have really accomplished something much bigger in that one area? The answer might be yes, it might be no. You may have put everything you have into it, you still wouldn't have had what it takes, and then you had nothing else to fall back on. That's the one flip side of the coin. I know, there are plenty of people who've gone out to California to be an actor who probably are as good or better than Tom Cruise or Johnny Depp. They probably really are, as far as their acting ability. But we'll never know who they are, because for whatever reason, the stars didn't line up, they didn't get the right audition, and they're waiting tables out there after being out there for 12 years. And that's risky too. They put everything they had into that one venture. So sometimes I say, what's the right answer? Did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing?
And I always found this a fascinating conversation, because you brought this up to me before, and I thought on it a lot. And I thought about it, and I'm like, but all of those gentlemen that you mentioned, that's all they are. That's it.
Yeah.
But you're more than that.
But see, I think that's the price that maybe you have to pay. And that's the only reason I thought we were discussing this tonight. It may be helpful for somebody at the beginning of their life or beginning of their career, younger. And that's the only reason for getting into this deep thinking, my brain hurts kind of retrospective thinking.
I find fascinating about you.
So people can ask the question, it's like, hey, is it better to hit the very top in one area? I mean, here's a perfect example. It sometimes struck me as odd. I remember when we sold our company. It doesn't exactly relate, but it's close. When we sold our company, one of the ways my wife and I celebrated is we took like a 2-month tour of Asia. So we went to China, Thailand, Vietnam, every place. And I remember when I came back, Ingve was laughing with me a little bit at his house. He goes, "I ain't been no big deal. I've been in all those places." And I said, "Well, that's good." I said, "What did you think of walking the Great Wall of China?" I didn't do that.
Right.
I said, "What about Tiananmen Square?" I didn't see that. Well, what about the Ming terracotta warriors or the Ming Dynasty temples? No, I didn't see that. I said, "So what you're telling me is you saw the inside of an airplane, a tour bus, and a stage, and a Holiday Inn hotel."
Exactly.
That's what you saw.
I think that's a beautiful thing that you just said.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point.
Yeah.
You've actually seen the arc.
Yeah.
Of success. But continue. I'm sorry, kid.
No.
So go ahead.
But still, you do sometimes wonder, if you could, or at least maybe as you get older, but it reflects somebody younger, because maybe it's going to influence them what path they want to take. Because I do know some people who are very, very successful at one thing, much more successful, well known, wealthier than I'll ever be or have been, far more. But like you say, it's for one thing. And when you start talking to them, you realize how many things they did not experience in life.
Right.
See,
that's the thing.
And here it comes. That comes to the dilemma. There's two sides of the coin. So now you ask yourself, would you have rather been super popular, super successful, super wealthy in one area and missed out on tons of other things in life, experiences, or had more experiences but had a more humble, low-key existence?
Right.
There's no right answer. I mean, everybody's.
You're right. Yeah, that's a subjective thing.
But it's a two-road thing. If you're the guy who had the single success, you probably wonder what variety would have been like. If you're the guy who had variety, you wonder what reaching, what it might be like being I don't know, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk level, character.
Michael, I've always thought of it this way. There's a price for everything, right? Now, going back to, we talked about this before. I had chosen a certain path. I would have sacrificed certain things,
Hmm.
but maybe my life would have been different, or maybe I don't know. But I followed my muse, and the rewards I got from it, from knowledge and ability on the instrument, I personally am okay with that.
Hmm.
But I understand the dichotomy,
Yeah.
that struggle of like saying, well, I take this path. There's a price to pay for every path you take, and the question always comes down to is, what are you willing to pay?
Hmm.
What's your price, right?
Right.
Isn't that what it always comes down to?
Yeah.
What's your price? And Michael, you've had these abilities in many different facets of life. Being able to focus on, you know, going through this extreme scuba training, going through college, getting the guitar, seriously, a little later than most people would have, but you
Hmm.
did. You applied yourself, put out a CD. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm gonna do some chemical engineering over. Oh, you know what? This guy's a shit show. I'm going to start my own company, and you do, and then you
Yeah.
sell it. Then you end up getting back to the universe. You end up managing one of your biggest heroes, the cat that got you to think, oh man, the guitar can do this. Now you're
Hmm.
managing this guy, and then you're like, it's time to write a book. I'm going to write a book. You do that. You do all of these things. It almost makes you the most interesting man in the world. I don't know why Dos Equis didn't hire you, like to be that dude that goes, "I'm the most interesting man in the world." I
Right.
think it was a great thing. Like I think everything you did was great, and I'm coming from the outside in, looking in at that and
No, I
going, "Holy
appreciate
shit!"
and I appreciate that. I really do. And like I said, I feel grateful and lucky in a lot of ways. Here again, we were just getting into the cerebral side of saying, hey, what if? You know,
Right.
what is that? What might have happened? Doesn't mean it's better or
Eh,
worse. It's just that
Well,
curiosity.
and it's true. Yeah, what might have happened? Yeah, you could. It could have. But I look at it this way: what might have happened? Okay, rewind the clock, and you're like, okay, you hear Ingve. You're like, okay, I can do that, and you do that.
Hmm.
But Ingve already happened, so you'd have to actually rewind. You'd actually have to fuck up the timeline
Hmm.
of everything and go. I heard Ingve. I'm going to do that before Ingve. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
whole thing. Um, no, I think the trajectory was right. And look, I'm sitting here at 54 talking to a man that's 60, and I look older than you. So that tells you everything. You know what I mean? You look
Yeah.
fantastic. You play great. You know, I've been
Well,
honored
that is that sir is an undeserved compliment. You you deserve the word great when it comes to playing. Like I said, you're at the Holdsworth, Paul Gilbert level up there. I'm at Tony Iommi, Iron Maiden level.
which is absolutely valid and
Yeah.
absolutely great. And I think that it's Kit Kat, man, chocolate and peanut butter, two great tastes and go great together. There's no issue there, and I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
It's something that I feel awakened to get back to what I was working on years ago, and to continue that. And you've been a great help in that. You've helped me in many ways, not only with my health.
Mhm.
It may not look that way to my watchers, but it's true. Um, and you've been a really great ear for me. You've been really good to me, and I deeply appreciate that. And your story is fascinating to me. I've always been fascinated about your story. This guy that just, I'm going to go do that, and you do it, and that's what I love about it. And I love performing on your music when I get the opportunity to do so. And,
Okay, thanks.
you're an absolutely amazing human being and a great guy and a great friend, and I deeply appreciate you. So um, I thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm glad I got it back into your early years too, because I really
Oh
wanted to
yeah.
get into that. So
Well, like I said, hopefully there's something there that will ring relevant or uh, insightful or inspirational to some younger person listening. Because if I say younger, heck, I'm getting to the point where almost everybody's younger. but but like I said, there might be hopefully in our conversation tonight there's something that hits somebody and goes, hey, I can use that, or that helps me, or that gives me something to think about. And if so, that's the most I can hope for with this.
oh, without a doubt, absolutely. And I think one of the core things is focus,
Mhm.
vision, and follow through. Because that's the thing I have always took from you. You know,
Mhm.
focus, vision, and follow through. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Then you do it and you follow through with it. And you know, it's an interesting story because and I said this earlier. I'm actually going to say this for the audience: is that my first connection with Michael was through the Ingve thing, which would make sense to people who know me. It's like, oh, Um, but what I've learned from you, Michael, over the years is much deeper than just that. The universe works in unique ways, and that connection, and that follow through, and that discipline, and that's why I was really interested in talking about the scuba
Yeah.
training, because I think that genesis of that discipline, whether you even recognize that as discipline at 14 or not, doesn't
Mhm.
matter. I think that there was a discipline that came from you that you've applied to your life. And I think it's the discipline that is the most, to me, and it's the one thing I work on every day. And I got a lot of that from you, from our conversations, is daily discipline, you know, whether it's weight training, working on your health, working on your guitar playing, working on your business, working on all of these aspects of your life, getting back to the one thing you kept saying, you're too busy to be bored.
Right.
You know, how awesome is that to get to the point where I don't have time to be bored?
Hmm.
I'm too busy. I
Yeah.
got things going on. I'm living my life. And that's the one thing I always took from you, from our time of speaking together and reading your book, which I did. I always realized, I was like, this guy, he's living life.
Hmm.
He's too busy to think about anything else. It's great. It's great, and I can't thank you enough for that.
All right. Well, good.
And as an aside, I can't thank you for talking me out of that one contract of a tour in Italy that would have probably cost me
Oh,
my
yeah. I remember that. Oh,
yeah.
speaking of which, I got to thank you for something. It just showed up from Amazon today.
Oh, really? I didn't. Did I send you something from Amazon? Oh, my man, you're gonna love that
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
You're gonna love that book. Dave did a great job. Now, I,
Hmm.
I will tell you, that that is not every example in the original thesaurus. However, what Dave did with that book is absolutely amazing. And anytime you have questions on anything from that,
Okay.
especially the master chords, I'm
All right.
happy to talk to you about it. Yeah.
All right. I'm probably going to take you up on that. because
please do.
I certainly can see that this is not everything that's in the official book, but I'll be honest, there's certainly probably enough here to fill out the rest of my lifetime of guitar playing. So,
Well, I mean, even same here. Like, it's not within hand's reach, but yeah, I work out of that book.
yeah.
I work out of the original book, but yeah, I mean, Dave did such an amazing job with that book, and I've altered some of the stuff for my teachings from that literature, from Dave's literature, and he did an amazing job. And anytime you want to discuss some of the harmonic applications, I'm around, man. We'll make it happen.
Well, like I said, I will take you up on that.
Absolutely. I hope you do. All right, we're going to toast off.
All right.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing your life and your insights with us. An amazing time. Can't tell you how great. I always have a good time with you.
All right. Well, thank you.
Next time I'm down in Florida, I'm going to take the extra couple hours and drive down to your house. And,
All right.
I'll stay in the yard. You don't want a Viking staying in your house.
That's okay.
Never ends
You can
well.
play around the studio some. We'll take the Targa out to the Everglades out here for a loop.
Oh, really? Do you have one of those? You have one of those? You said out on the Everglades?
No. I said we'll take the Targa out for a loop around the Everglades.
That's what I was saying. You have a Targa?
The 911 is a Targa.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Oh,
Okay,
yeah. I'm sorry. I thought you meant something.
You thought I meant airboat.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. No airboat.
You gonna let me drive it?
That's a different story.
Yeah, you see, I saw the hesitation there.
That's a different story.
That's okay. It's your baby. I'll be in the passenger seat. I'm okay with that. Yeah. Actually, I wouldn't trust myself behind the wheel. Now I want to get a Targa. Man.
Yeah.
All right.
Certainly don't take that as personal.
No, not at all. I don't.
Even my wife doesn't want to drive it.
You see, that's the thing. I believe in that. Like when you have a vehicle like that, that's so tactile, that's a personal relationship.
Yeah.
That's a personal relationship. You know what I mean? Yeah. No. Come down. I'll be in the passenger seat. It's all good. So anyway, thank you so much for hanging and sharing your story and your insight. And yeah, well, I'll have you back on. We'll do more. There's always more.
Got it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Spitzer. Thanks again. I'll catch you.